Millions of people are quitting alcohol, but the big question is why? Why are so many people stopping drinking? Well, after not drinking for 6 years myself, after almost 10 years of drinking, I can safely say that it changed my life forever. But it hasn't just changed my life. Every day, more and more people are waking up and telling themselves that enough is enough and they're putting this stupid drug behind of them. And if you're questioning your relationship with alcohol right now, and you're wondering whether or not you should get rid of it, but you've been struggling, you've been fighting, you're not really sure what to do, then you simply must watch this video, because we've put together some of the most influential and inspirational stories of celebrities overcoming their battles with alcohol. And I promise you one thing. If you watch this entire video, it could change your relationship with alcohol forever. Understanding how other people see this drug can completely shift your worldview. And if you want information on a new method to stopping drinking that lies in reframing how you view alcohol, then please head over to soberclear.com. You can learn more about how we've helped hundreds of clients and have a program that has a 92 to 97% success rate. So let's get into things. So, Bradley Charles Cooper. He's been nominated for 4 Academy Awards. In 2012, People magazine declared him the sexiest man alive. 3 years later, Time included him in their list of the 100 most influential people in the world today. Reportedly, in 1 year alone, between 2018 and 2019, Cooper earned a whopping $57 million. His net worth today is estimated at over $100 million. As Hollywood stars come, it doesn't get much bigger than this. But how exactly did Bradley start out? Well, his first TV appearance was at the age of 24 in 1999, when he actually appeared in an episode of Sex and the City. He would then struggle for a few years with minor roles in various TV series and movies, until he got his first big hit with 2009's The Hangover. This movie would go on to rake in close to $500 million worldwide. It was followed up by other massive box office hits like Limitless, American Hustle, American Sniper, and A Star is Born. Not to mention 2 more massive sequels to the original Hangover movie. So, as I said, after his first role in Sex and the City, Cooper spent the next few years struggling. He was often getting passed over for roles. And his appearances on Alias, the TV series that he was playing at the time, got cut down. Now, at some stage, he actually seriously considered packing it all in and changing careers. There were a variety of factors at play here, and I don't want to oversimplify things. But there is no doubt that according to Cooper himself, that alcohol and drugs played a massive role in his career problems. Now, it is important to stress here that he was not your stereotypical alcoholic or problem drinker. You know, the kind that you see in movies. It's not like he didn't show up at the set for work, and it's not like he passed out in front of the camera or anything like that. It never got that bad, on set at least, because off-set was an entirely different story. There's one incident that he described in an interview a few years ago. He was drunk at a party and deliberately banged his head against the concrete floor to show everybody how tough he was. And then, when he started bleeding, he banged it again one more time, just in case anybody still doubted his toughness. Now, he ended up spending the entire night at the hospital. In another interview, he said, "I remember looking at my life, my apartment, my dogs, and I thought, what's happening? I was so concerned with what you thought of me, how I was coming across, how I would survive that day," he says. "I always felt like an outsider. I just lived in my head." Now, for Bradley, the turning point came in 2004 when he was just 29 years old. Now, Cooper is generally open to talking about his addiction and subsequent recovery, but there are some things that he has chosen not to share, and we'll probably never find out everything. So he didn't actually give us the particulars of what happened that year. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because at its core, the problem wasn't the personal stuff that was happening in his life at that time, or the stupid things that he'd do when he was drunk, or even the fact that his career was failing. At its core, at the most fundamental level, it appeared that he hated himself for drinking, because he knew that every drink was taking him further and further away from fulfilling his potential. In his own words, "I realized I wasn't going to live up to my potential, and that scared the hell out of me. I thought, wow, I'm actually going to ruin my life. I'm really going to ruin it. I knew I had to make some changes if I ever wanted to fulfill whatever potential that I had as a human being. I felt a huge sense of responsibilities to my parents, especially to my father. His father having been the person who helped him get into acting. And just like that, he packed it all in. He has never had another drink since that day. Slowly but surely, his career started turning around. He started getting more and better roles. And only 5 years later, he became one of the most recognized faces in Hollywood with The Hangover. Bit ironic, right? In 2015, he sat down for an interview with Barbara Walters. It was part of a series of interviews called The 10 Most Fascinating People of 2015.
In your late 20s, you stopped drinking.
Stopped drinking, yeah.
Very difficult?
No, beautiful. Unbelievable.
Better.
Oh, are you kidding? I would never be sitting here with you. No way, no chance.
Because?
Because I wouldn't have been able to have access to myself or other people, or even been able to take in other people if I hadn't changed my life. No way. And I never would have been able to have relationships that I do. I never would have been able to take care of my father the way I did when he was sick. So many things.
Now, this part of the interview was quite bizarre. The fact that one of the most celebrated journalists in America would actually ask her interviewee if his life has changed for the better or for the worse after he stopped drinking. Now let's just think about this for 1 second. If he had been addicted to heroin or cocaine or whatever else instead of alcohol, would she still have asked him that question? Of course not. It would have gone without saying that yes, of course things have changed for the better after he stopped using. So why this double standard when it comes to drinking alcohol? Why do we have to question the obvious? Is it just a social bias because alcohol is legal and other drugs like heroin and cocaine are illegal? Well, that can't be the reason, because smoking cigarettes is also legal. But she would never have asked him that question if they were talking about cigarettes. Now, there is one reason and one reason alone for this double standard. It's clearly because the alcohol industry has been very successful in convincing modern society that alcohol is a unique drug, that it's a drug that actually offers real benefits to its users, real benefits, and that once you stop drinking that you're somehow going to lose the benefits. Now, historically, the tobacco industry was also extremely successful in this. Well into the 1960s and 70s, the tobacco industry was able to sell society on the supposed benefits of smoking, be it the taste, the image, the sociability. Collectively, we all viewed tobacco in a completely different light. But the pushbacks by governments and society at large was so strong that today tobacco is seen by everybody for what it is: a useless poison. And smokers aren't glamorized in any way. They're ostracized, made to smoke outside in the freezing cold and pay a fortune in taxes. Alcohol, on the other hand, is the single toxic drug on the planet today which society still accepts that it has benefits to it. And to some extent, its users are still glamorized. Anyway, so going back to Bradley, it's clear from what he says that he's found stopping drinking easy, effortless, and life started changing for the better. But what was the downside? What did he lose out on? Was his social life adversely affected? Was he somewhat less sociable, less charming or bubbly, as we say in the UK? Well, this is a very common fear with all drinkers, especially those in outgoing sociable professions where social connections matter. Actors, entrepreneurs, singers, artists, public speakers, celebrities, you name it. So, here's how Cooper describes his social life after stopping. Oh, I'm actually myself. And I don't have to put on this air to be somebody else and think this person still wants to work with me. I was rediscovering myself in this workplace and it was wonderful. I was grateful and happy to be working and filling that void in smaller moments. These kinds of fears are holding back millions of people around the world from stopping, even though at their heart of hearts they desperately do want to stop. People ask, will I be the same? Will people still like me? Will I still be the life of the party? And the answer is, you can. Not only will your social life not suffer, but on the contrary, it will flourish like never before. Today, Cooper has one daughter from his ex-girlfriend, and he also lives with his mother, who moved in with him after his beloved dad passed away. In 2020, Brad Pitt publicly credited Cooper for being his inspiration when he stopped drinking in 2016. In his own words, I got sober because of this guy and every day has been happier ever since. I love you and I thank you. The two of them were recently spotted on a night out together and they were drinking sparkling water. Now, no two people's road to freedom from alcohol will be exactly the same. For some, like Cooper, the light bulb just kind of goes off one day. Everything clicks and they never have another drink in their life. The whole thing is effortless and instant. Overall, a pretty awesome story.
I would call it a problem. It's now not a problem. I drank in search of happiness and in search of a lifestyle that I thought would bring me to happiness. It didn't, and I woke up one morning going, wow, I've drank a lot, but I'm still not happy. What's that about? And, now we're about a year and a half later, and my life has turned around immeasurably. It's a wonderful thing.
When the first Harry Potter hit the silver screen in 2001, the world went crazy. At a budget of $120 $25 million, the film would go on to rake over $1 billion worldwide, smashing multiple box office records along the way. Cast in the main role was 12-year-old Daniel Radcliffe. Born and raised in London, the young Daniel had played in some minor parts before and was relatively unknown. Overnight, he shot to fame and fortune, earning $1 million for this role. Following the movie's success, Radcliffe would go on to star in 7 sequels. By the time of the final 2011 installment, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, Radcliffe had earned an estimated $70 million. Not bad for a 22-year-old. Daniel came from an acting family, with both of his parents having acted at some point in their lives. From a very young age, he wanted to audition for movie and theatre roles, but his parents were very skeptical. And as we'll see later in the video, it's understandable. Now, that being said, they finally allowed him to audition when he was almost 10, and the rest was history. Being a young movie star can be stressful enough, but on top of that, the young Daniel was expected to keep a clean public image as well. A drunken Harry Potter just doesn't make for very good publicity. Unfortunately for Daniel, the paparazzi were on him non-stop, and the pressure was immense. Let's listen to what he has to say in a 2019 interview with Sam Jones.
What I took away from that was that every move you made was scrutinized, and there must have been a pressure associated with that. And I imagine that would feel like everywhere you went, you were still around the same people that knew you in high school that wouldn't let you grow and move on or something.
I mean, nobody consciously obviously doing that, but
no, in your
own
head, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it's one of the reasons I love spending time in New York, is that, like, no one really gives a there, like, about who you are. Like, I can walk in places and no one cares, and it's great. In London, there's, like, a sense of, like, because I'm English, there's a sense of, like, familiarity and, like, ownership, almost.
Yeah.
And particularly with, like, super, like, rich upper-class people who will just, like, grab you like you are theirs. And be like, come here, say hello to my friend.
Really?
All right, mate.
It's that familiar.
Oh, yeah. And not always, but sometimes.
God, you've probably had some of the awkwardest moments in history.
Yeah, some. But there is, like, an awareness that I really struggled with, particularly in my, like, late teens, when I was going out to places for the first time, where you would like feel. And it could have largely been in my head, but you would feel watched when you went into a bar, when you went into a pub, and then, you know, in my case, the quickest way of forgetting about the fact that you were being watched was to get very drunk, and then as you get very drunk, you become aware that, oh, people are watching more now because now I'm getting very drunk, so I should probably drink more to ignore that more, and, like, you know, so it gets into, you know, you get into it can affect your psyche, and you sort of have to, and I think that's something, as I said, there is no blueprint for starting young and working stuff out.
By all accounts, he started drinking heavily in 2007, but to avoid being seen drinking in public, he began to drink more and more at home on his own. He would go on drinking sprees, isolated in his home for days at a time, and that didn't stop the tabloids from speculating that Radcliffe would often come to the set drunk or hungover, something which the star has subsequently admitted. Now, right before the end of Harry Potter, his drinking actually got worse. According to his own account, in those last couple of years up to 2010, he would black out every single time that he drank. In a 2014 interview, he looked back at facing a life post-Harry Potter. Quote, "It is a pressure of living with the thought, oh, what if all these people are saying I'm not going to have a career? What if they're all going to be right and we'll be laughing and I will be consigned to a bunch of where are they now lists?" In another interview, he had this to say, "I was a recluse at 20. It was pathetic. It wasn't me. I'm a fun, polite person, and it turned me into a rude bore. For a long time, people were saying to me, we think you have a problem. But in the end, I had to come to the realization myself." By 2010, Radcliffe had had enough. He stopped drinking, by all accounts, just before the final installment of Harry Potter. By that point, word of his struggles with alcohol had gotten out, and the media were asking questions. Radcliffe's Harry Potter co-stars rushed to defend him, saying that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion and that Daniel's alcohol use just wasn't so severe. But by that point, Radcliffe had already cleaned up his act and stopped drinking completely, something which, unfortunately, was not meant to last. The following year, in 2012, Radcliffe relapsed. The tabloid press reported that he got kicked out of a New York bar in a drunken state after starting a fight with the DJ. Now, we do have no specifics of how bad his relapse got, but it probably lasted a few months. According to Radcliffe's own account, the following year, 2013, he gave up drinking for good. It appears that he actually received no formal treatment for this. Instead, he says that he relied on friends and mentors for support and advice. But frankly, he had already made the decision to quit for good this time, and that's what really mattered in the end.
So when you found yourself in that situation of, oh, I'm just going to drink and try to forget about it, and then I'll drink more because I can't forget about it because how did you sort of pull yourself out of that spiral? Because that was probably the fulcrum in your life where it could have gone either way, right?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you know, it took a few years and it took a couple of attempts, but I think I have been just unbelievably lucky with the people that I've had around me at certain times in my life. And I met some really key people, some of them actors, some of them not, who just gave me great advice and really cared for me. And ultimately, it was my own decision. Like, I woke up one morning after a night going like, this is probably not good. And I don't miss it generally, like, now at all. Like, I really, and I know, and that varies for some people really still do, and some people, like, don't. And when I think of, like, like the sort of chaos I used to invite into my life, I'm like, I'm really much happier.
Now, alcohol was not the first major struggle in the young star's life. Already, from the age of 5, he developed obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. This compelled him to repeat the same actions time and time again. For example, he would spend as much as 5 minutes checking to make sure that he turned off a light switch. After getting professional treatment at a young age, he was able to overcome this condition. Apart from alcohol, Radcliffe, who has described himself as a, quote, addictive personality, has struggled with another substance, tobacco. In 2014, he reportedly entered tobacco rehab in a bid to kick his 20 cigarette a day habit. According to sources close to the star, after stopping drinking, Radcliffe was determined to conquer his last major vice, smoking. The program Radcliffe entered was a residential treatment that involved individual and group counseling, along with various other modalities like herbal treatments to control the cravings. There were also activities included like swimming and yoga. But unlike drinking, Radcliffe's bid to stop smoking was actually not successful. In 2020, he was spotted smoking a cigarette between shows outside of a London theatre. Now, as you'd expect, ever since kicking the bottle, Radcliffe's health and personal life have gotten better and better. He hit the gym in earnest, and in 2016, he sported an impressive physique for a Vanity Fair photo shoot. By all indications, this was the result of a clean diet and low-intensity bodyweight exercises. Radcliffe's personal life is also looking better than ever. Though not yet married, he has been in a relationship with American actress Erin Darr, with whom he starred in a 2012 movie. Gerard Butler shot into stardom with the 2007 film 300. His lead role in that film saw him cast as King Leonidas of Sparta, who, with his 300 men, defended Sparta against a vastly larger Persian army. Grossing over $450 million worldwide, the film was one of 2007's largest box office hits. In subsequent years, Butler found more success in films like Law-Abiding Citizen and The Bounty Hunter, where he starred alongside Jennifer Aniston. He's gone on to amass a fortune of $30 million and win numerous awards. But acting was something that Butler found relatively late in his life. Believe it or not, before he started acting, he was actually a lawyer, a trainee lawyer to be precise. Born in Scotland in 1969, his parents separated when he was 18 months old. He wouldn't see his father again until he was 16. Sadly, his father was diagnosed with terminal cancer just 6 years after they reunited. Now, Butler studied at the University of Glasgow School of Law, where he was even president of the Law Society. After he finished, he went to Edinburgh to work as a trainee lawyer. There was a problem though: his drinking and partying. The stories of his drinking and partying are legendary and include him smashing bottles of booze on his own head. Now, a week before he would qualify as a lawyer, his drinking finally caught up to him and he was fired. This meant that for all of his years of studies and training, he couldn't actually practice law. In his own words, "I used to drink until I couldn't remember anything. I was just mad for it and on a death wish. It was madness. 1 or 2 drinks was never enough for me. I was a foot on the floor all the way drinker." At 25 years old, he was unemployed, broke and without a career. He headed south to London and for a time did some odd jobs to survive. Eventually, through an old acquaintance and almost by accident, he got his first role at a theatre play. He was 27 years old. Over the next 5 years, he would go on to star in several smaller Hollywood roles, including 2000's Dracula 2000. Around the year 2000, when he had already had his first Hollywood parts, he decided that he had had enough. Around this time, he stopped drinking completely. Shortly after that, his career started to really take off. Here's how he described things in a 2012 interview for the Red Bulletin magazine. "It had to go. I don't miss it. Now it's as if I never had a drink in my life. At one point, I could never have conceived going out and not drinking, but as time goes on, you lose the urge and the insecurity that often makes people drink in the first place." In another interview, he said, "I know what it's like to feel lost, crazy, aggressive, fearful, and to be screaming at the world that you have no use of purpose, and the best thing to do is go down screaming and take as many people down with you as possible and get really effed up along the way." He now hasn't had a drink in more than 20 years. Now, Butler was successful in kicking alcohol and turning his life around after that. He would go on to establish himself as one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But in 2012, the Hollywood superstar had a stint in rehab. This was roughly 12 years after he had given up drinking. Interestingly, he hadn't started drinking again. I told you the guy has not drank in 20 years. This time, he actually checked in because of an issue with prescription painkillers. Butler first started the pills following an accident that he suffered while shooting 300. In 2011, he suffered yet another injury while shooting a surfing scene for another film. Butler spent 3 weeks at the Betty Ford Clinic in California. The clinic has welcomed many celebrities in the past, including Lindsay Lohan, Drew Barrymore, Ozzy Osbourne, and Alice Cooper. Some of the activities and services on offer include a 12-step program, individual and group therapy, fitness, yoga, animal-assisted therapy, and many more things. A 30-day stay costs in the region of $30,000. According to all sources, Butler's treatment was a success. He has stayed free of addiction ever since. Nowadays, Butler spends his time between his properties in California and Scotland. In 2020, he split from his longtime girlfriend, Morgan Brown. In the past, he's been linked to celebrities including Jennifer Aniston and Cameron Diaz, though he denies all of them, and he also has no children. His upcoming movie, Plane, does not have a release date yet. Alfredo James Pacino was born in 1940 in Harlem, New York, to second-generation Italian Americans. His mother's parents actually came to the US from Corleone, the same Sicilian village that would later become famous in the movie The Godfather. His father also hailed from Sicily. Now, Pacino's parents divorced when he was only 2 years of age, and the young Al moved in with his mother to her parents' house. He credits his maternal grandfather with playing the most important role in his life, effectively raising him like a father. Now, from a young age, he was infatuated with acting, spending hours imitating the actors that he would see in the movies. Before long, the neighborhood started calling him the actor. Now, at just 17 years of age, he dropped out of school to pursue his acting dreams. For 3 years, he worked various odd jobs, including a janitor and a busboy. In 1960, he went back to Sicily. Rumor has it that he was so broke that he was actually forced to sell his body to an elderly Sicilian lady in exchange for shelter and food. Now, a couple of years later, he sadly lost his mother Rose. This had a devastating impact on him, only made worse by the passing of his beloved grandfather the following year. In his own words, it was the darkest period of his life. To this day, the fact that his mother never got to see how successful he would become is something that deeply bothers him. Now, Pacino would struggle for the next few years, even to the point of living on the streets during the 1960s. Now, in 1967, he got his big break. After having been rejected previously, he was finally accepted into the Actors Studio in New York. Famous alumni of this prestigious institution include Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, and many more. From there, Pacino went to Broadway and soon got his first movie role in 1971's The Panic in Needle Park, where he actually played a junkie. And it was also around this time that his own addiction to alcohol started to become a serious problem. We'll come back to that in a second. Now, his big break came in 1972's The Godfather. The film details the story of Vito Corleone, who emigrates from Sicily and builds the Corleone mafia family in New York. The role was famously played by Marlon Brando, and Pacino acted as his younger son, Michael. The director, Francis Ford Coppola, felt that De Niro would be perfect for the role. Paramount Pictures preferred Warren Beatty or Robert Redford, but Coppola was adamant, and the role went to Pacino. Now, that would be a career-making and career-defining moment for the young Al. By that point, however, his drinking had gotten out of control. To make things worse, he was completely broke and convinced that the movie would be a massive failure. Now, Pacino also knew that regardless of how the movie fared at the box office, he wouldn't get to see a dime of the paycheck. All the money went straight to servicing a debt to another acting studio. In interviews, he stated that he was so drunk most of the time that he doesn't remember much of what happened during the film, or what happened during most of the 1970s for that matter. Now, part of the roots to his addiction he traces to the drinking culture of Hollywood. In the acting scene, heavy drinking is far more socially accepted than society in general. This goes back to the early days of black and white movies, when actors would celebrate the final scenes of the day with martinis. By the 1970s, the drinking culture wasn't as strong, but still drinking was rife. Hollywood was definitely not the place to be working if you were looking for sober role models. Another reason that Pacino turned to drinking was to cope with the stress of acting. On set, he uses the classic method acting technique. The technique is all about empathizing with your character rather than faking it. You have to actually feel what the character is going through. Own it, make it part of you. Depending on the character that you're playing, this can actually be deeply traumatic. From street drunkie to tragic crime boss, Pacino's early roles were tough, and the toll that they took on him added to his drinking problems. In 1974, Pacino received a Best Actor Academy Award nomination for his role in Serpico. I think that's how you pronounce it. He has publicly admitted that he was so drunk and lost on that night that he did not even have a speech prepared. He was so out of it, and he was hoping that he would not win. Fortunately, for him, the prize went to another actor, sparing Pacino from a potentially very embarrassing scene. Astonishingly, in spite of all of his drinking, 1975 was an even better professional year for the actor. His film Dog Day Afternoon, where he played a failed bank robber, generated over $50 million at the box office from a budget of just $3 million. What the world did not know was how close Pacino had come to rejecting the role. Pacino was so drunk when he first read the script that he wanted nothing to do with the film. The film's producers pleaded with him to read it again when he was sober. He didn't drink for a couple of days, and upon rereading the script, he asked himself why on earth he had turned down the role. So things went on for most of the 1970s. A burgeoning acting career accompanied by even worse drinking. But how exactly did Pacino stop drinking alcohol? Well, Pacino has stated in interviews that perhaps the largest influence on him was his close friend and mentor, Charlie Lofton, who taught him at the Actors Studio. Lofton had struggled with his own drinking problems in the past and begged Pacino to stop. Not stop forever, but just to give it a pause and reevaluate his life from a sobriety standpoint. And that is exactly what Pacino did. But unlike many of the celebrities that we've covered in the past, Pacino did not stop overnight. He describes the experience as gradual and with some help from Alcoholics Anonymous. Pacino had his last drink in 1977, and today he says he doesn't miss it one bit. You know the rest of the story. One of the most decorated actors of all time, with an astonishing 9 Academy Award nominations, 5 BAFTAs, 3 Emmys, 2 Grammys, 13 Golden Globes, and many more. Not to mention a net worth of $120 million. He is the proud father of 3 children, and to this day spends most of his time in his native New York. Listen, alcohol is nothing more than ethanol. It's a poison, something that damages every cell in your body. And if you want to take back control of your drinking, but you don't want to do it on your own, and you're not interested in going to AA meetings and digging up the past with a therapist, and you want a new way of doing things, I have great news. Just head over to soberclear.com to learn more about how we can help you. Or if you want to book a call to see if my new method could be a good match for you, then just click the link in the description. There'll be a link there where you can go to a calendar to choose a time to speak with me directly. That'll be an extremely valuable call where we'll actually give you a plan to follow, and then you can either implement that plan on your own or we can do it together in my coaching program. So again, go to soberclear.com or click the link in the description. Alexandra Ray Baldwin III grew up in a middle-class suburb of New York, the oldest of 6 siblings. Born in 1958, he describes his childhood as divided into 2 parts. The first years were happy ones, but when Baldwin was 10, tragedy struck his family. His paternal grandparents died in short succession. His grandfather from a heart attack and his grandmother from falling down the steps whilst visiting him in hospital. This changed his father, making him more absent and withdrawn from family life. He began to work longer hours at the public high school, where he was employed as a teacher, while also becoming progressively less involved with his own children. At the same time as the family was drifting apart, one thing was becoming increasingly abundant to the young Alec. They were totally broke. Notices about late payments of bills were always arriving in the post, and the garbage collection guys would pick up the garbage from every single house in their street except from their own. These unpleasant experiences would leave a mark on the young Alec. The family drifting apart, Alec soon would get involved with a group of older boys who would first introduce him to alcohol, cigarettes, and eventually cannabis. His alcohol and cannabis use would continue into his college years. He would go on to spend 3 years at George Washington University before auditioning for the theatre program at New York University. After being accepted, he decided to ditch a career in law, which was his original plan in order to pursue acting. Baldwin would start his acting career in the soap opera The Doctors in the early 1980s. This was soon followed by his appearance on the CBS primetime soap opera Knots Landing, which would make Baldwin widely known. But it was his appearance in 1990's spy thriller The Hunt for Red October that really propelled his career. The film earned him international recognition and set the stage for a string of future box office hits. The story is about a Soviet naval submarine captain who wishes to defect to the US. Baldwin played the role of a CIA analyst, Jack Ryan. After The Hunt for Red October, Baldwin's career kept going up and up. Over the following decade, he would star in a series of box office hits, including Notting Hill and Pearl Harbor. More recently, he starred alongside Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. He's been nominated for just about every acting award that there is, including the Oscars, Emmys, BAFTAs, and Golden Globe Awards, not to mention several awards for his work in theatre. As you might have guessed, all this work has paid off well, and Baldwin is sitting on a fortune of around $60 million. Not bad for somebody who has described himself as an accidental actor. Now, Alec Baldwin's first appearance on television, on the NBC soap opera Doctors, coincided with the time when he got really hooked on drinking. At only 22 years old, he felt accepted and at home in the bar. Quote, the clinking of the ice, the luminous coloured bottles arranged behind the bar, the bartenders and waiters in starched white shirts, the tablecloths, and Rothman cigarettes made everything seem right. I drank Canadian Club in the winter and Boodle's Gin in the summer. All of it combined to relax me for the first time in my 22 years. Most important of all, I was with people I liked and whom I believed like me. No matter how many stupid questions I asked or ill-informed opinions I expressed at the bar, I was home. To heavy alcohol consumption, Baldwin would soon add cocaine, especially after moving to LA in 1982. The cocaine use would soon spiral out of control, and by 1984 he was hospitalized on an overdose. Following that, Baldwin started attending Cocaine Anonymous, a 12-step program modeled after AA. Fearful of another cocaine overdose that would potentially cost his life, Baldwin stayed away from it for a good few months. But to cope with the cocaine cravings, he turned back to alcohol. Rather than stop by his dealer's house after work, he would head straight to the bar, which is where he spent lots of the fall and early winter of 1985. Now, many of the celebrities that we've already covered on this channel decided to turn their lives around after a particularly destructive event. Things such as incarceration, hospitalization, the loss of a loved one, you name it. There is no shortage of life-altering catastrophes that alcohol and drugs can bring to one's life. For Baldwin, however, the day of reckoning came not with a bang, but with a whimper. In the winter of 1985, an old friend came to visit him in LA. The friend bought cocaine, and Baldwin would get high for the first time since his hospitalization 6 months prior. The friend left after about an hour, saying he was going to get more cocaine and would be back soon. And he never came back. This left Baldwin frantically pacing the floor, desperately waiting for the cocaine that would never arrive. This was Saturday, February 23rd, 1985. Baldwin would spend the following Sunday at home, resting and reflecting on his life and future. On Monday, he went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and that was that. He never touched alcohol or drugs ever again. In his own words, from his autobiographical memoirs, I haven't had a drink or recreational drug since that day over 30 years ago. I surely have not had the courage to face all of my issues in the way AA gently recommends. However, I am profoundly grateful for discovering the program that saved my life. As frequently as I have gotten in my own way throughout my sobriety, I shudder to think how much more painful and destructive my behavior had I not been sober. Most important, through AA, I have a renewed relationship with God. a relationship I can call upon every day. Now, sadly, his friend who never came back with the cocaine that day went on using and he died 2 years later. When we talk about Hollywood legends, it is difficult to beat Sir Philip Anthony Hopkins. Widely considered to be one of the best actors of all time, the Welshman has picked up just about every award, prize, distinction, and nomination there is, and then some. Nominated for the Academy Awards a whopping 6 times, he has picked up 2 of the Oscars. First for his work in 1992's The Silence of the Lambs, where he plays a genius psychiatrist turned psychopathic killer, and more recently in 2021. For his role in The Father, where he plays a demented elderly person. At 83 years of age, this second award made him the oldest recipient of the Best Actor award in history. He's also won 4 BAFTAs, 2 Emmys, and has been nominated for 8 Golden Globes. In 1993, Queen Elizabeth II knighted him for his services to the arts, his second royal award following a 1987 CBE. As you can imagine, along with all the awards and distinctions, Sir Hopkins has become a very wealthy man. His net worth is an estimated $160 million. Now, Hopkins was born in the small seaside community of Port Talbot, Wales in 1937. Incidentally, this small town is the birthplace of another Hollywood legend, the late Richard Burton. The only child to a baker and a housewife, the young Anthony showed his penchant for the creative arts from a young age. His parents and teachers soon found that he enjoyed writing, drawing, and the piano much more than schoolwork. When he was 12, his parents sent him to boarding school, hoping that it would shore up his grades. It didn't work, and he continued to suffer academically. After finishing school, he one day walked into a local YMCA, where they had an amateur acting group. He describes being on that stage as the first time in his life that he felt comfortable. It was then that he knew his future was in acting. After graduating from the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama in Cardiff in 1957, the aspiring actor would then go on to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. Alumni of this prestigious institution include famous actors like Richard Attenborough, Sean Bean, Timothy Dalton, and more. After some early theatre work, Hopkins would get his first break on the silver screen with 1968's The Lion in Winter alongside Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole. The film was a success at the box office and racked up 3 Academy Awards. Now, from a young age, Hopkins was exposed to alcohol. It started with his father, who he has described as an alcoholic. His father would go through periods of abstinence before hitting the bottle with full force, at which point his personality would change, becoming a nasty and unpleasant man. In his younger years, Hopkins was an occasional drinker. But in the 1960s, as he was taking his first steps in film, his drinking worsened. This did not go unnoticed by those around him. Laurence Olivier himself told Hopkins that he was a talented guy and asked him why he was doing this to himself. He then sent him to a psychiatrist, who told him that he was suffering from, quote, creative tension related to being an actor. Now, Hopkins has described drinking as giving him some confidence, but also fueling his rage and anger. As the years went by, he became angrier and angrier, which led to his drinking more in order to get rid of the anger. He has described how he could empty an entire room by insulting every single person present. And it was also around this time that he was playing an alcoholic in a television play. The story was about a man who destroyed his relationship and life through drinking. While filming, Hopkins came to a stunning realization. He was an alcoholic himself, no different from the character that he was playing. But he was still not ready for a change. In 1974, he left the UK for New York, where he discovered that the bars never seemed to close down. He would drink until he, quote, fell off the bar stool. While his career was taking off, his drinking was becoming worse, and he felt deeply unhappy. Now, in the summer of 1975, the play that he was working on was close to finishing, and Hopkins was about to leave New York for California. Whilst working on that play, he became closer to a co-worker on the set called Mary. He described her as a wonderful woman with a warm heart and a great sense of humor. Over lunch one day, Mary described alcoholism as an illness with 3 aspects: mental, physical, and spiritual illness. She said, if you don't take the first drink, you won't get drunk. Mary then invited him to an AA meeting. He refused, adamant that he could sort out the problem himself. He managed to abstain from alcohol for 6 weeks. He describes himself as very comfortable during that time without cravings. He started feeling great and was full of energy. Before long, people started commenting on his improved appearance. His last night in New York, however, he went to a farewell party that somebody threw for him. He thought to himself, one whiskey won't hurt. And that was the last thing he remembers from that night. The next morning, he flew to California in really bad shape. Again, he managed to stay sober for a few weeks before eventually going on a new drinking spree. Now, in Christmas of 1975, Hopkins took his wife to the airport so she could catch a flight back to the UK and be with her family for the holidays. And he told her at the airport, "I think I'm an alcoholic." "Maybe you are. It's up to you," she replied. Her cold reply stunned Hopkins. By his own admission, his wife had put everything that she had into that marriage. Now he saw that his drinking was on the verge of destroying it all. As his wife walked away to the gate, Hopkins felt that he was losing his wife, his friends, and his entire life. He drove back to his apartment, a very depressed man. Now, after a few more drunk days and lots of time spent thinking, he decided that it was time to take the big step. That Monday morning, he walked to his closest AA branch. He expected to see old people and drunks lying around, but there was nothing of the kind. The lady at the reception repeated the same phrase that Mary had told him some months earlier. "If you don't take that first drink, you won't get drunk." Then she said something that stuck with him for the rest of his life. "Why don't you just trust in God?" At that moment, something clicked inside him, and he realized that it was all over. He knew that the drinking part of his life was behind him, and as he made his way back home, he felt that it had all been for a reason. The cravings left that day and never came back. That very same night, he went to his first AA meeting and thought to himself, "I've finally come home." All his life, 37 years, he had felt like an outsider. But in that big room, they were all the same. They were all in the same boat, all of them outsiders. This was the 29th of December, 1975. Fully 45 years later, in December of 2020, Sir Anthony Hopkins uploaded this inspirational message on social media.
Hello everyone, good morning. Well, New Year is coming. It's been a tough year, full of grief and sadness for many, many, many people. But 45 years ago today, I had a wake-up call. I was heading for disaster. Drinking myself to death. I'm not preachy, but I got a message, a little thought that said, "Do you want to live or die?" And I said, "I want to live." And suddenly the relief came, and my life has been amazing. And I have my off days and sometimes little bits of doubt and all that. But all in all, I say, hang in there. Today is the tomorrow you were so worried about yesterday. You young people, don't give up. Just keep in there. Just keep fighting. Be bold, and mighty forces will come to your aid. And that sustained me through my life. And that's all I've got to say. A Happy New Year. This is going to be the best year.
What a beautiful, beautiful message. Sometimes the simplest words are the most powerful ones. Brad Pitt was born in 1963 and grew up in Springfield, Missouri. His dad owned a trucking company, and according to Brad, he worked his butt off to provide for his family, and his mother was a school counselor. Brad spent a lot of time outdoors in scenery filled with cornfields. In all, a typical Midwestern childhood. After school, he went into journalism at the University of Missouri. While he was still in university, he realized that acting was his real calling. With only 2 weeks left before he earned his degree, he actually dropped out of university and moved to Los Angeles in 1986. He had only $300 and had to take a number of odd jobs to survive. But it literally turned out to be the best decision of his life. After some minor roles, he had his breakthrough in 1991's Thelma and Louise, where he played a small-time crook. Over the next few years, he would shoot to superstardom with films like 1995's crime thriller Seven and the science fiction classic 12 Monkeys. Since then, his career has just got bigger and bigger, to the point where he is one of the highest grossing actors of all time. Along the way, he's picked up 2 Oscars, 2 Golden Globe Awards, and a whole host of other prizes and nominations. His net worth is a whopping $300 million, and he earns a minimum of $20 million for each of his movies. For over a decade though, it was his relationship with Angelina Jolie that captured the world's attention and made him the undisputed king of the tabloid pages. Brangelina, as the pair came to be known, were seemingly the perfect couple. Beautiful, successful, famous, and happy. It didn't get any better than Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. But unbeknownst to the world, behind the scenes, things were not so mellow. Pitt had been battling with various addictions for nearly 3 decades. 2016 was when his addiction finally caught up to him. In September of that year, after 12 years of a relationship and 2 years of marriage, Jolie filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. As part of that, she requested full custody of their 6 children. Now, the world was in shock. The world's seemingly most perfect couple had fallen apart overnight. According to reports, the motivations behind Jolie's divorce filing were twofold: his alcohol abuse and the way that he parented their children. Sources close to the couple revealed that Angelina was worried about the safety of the children. Just a few days after news of her divorce filing went public, the world found out that Pitt was under investigation by the FBI for child abuse. The investigation centered around an altercation between Pitt and their elder adopted son, Maddox. According to the allegations by Jolie, there was a row between the couple on board of a private jet en route from France to the US. Maddox stepped in to defend his mother, at which point Brad somehow assaulted Maddox. A source close to Pitt admitted that the star was drunk, but denied that the altercation had reached the level of physical abuse or that anybody had been hurt. In the end, the FBI never brought any charges. Now, after a long legal battle that dragged on for years, Pitt was finally granted joint custody of their 6 kids in 2001. It was a decision that Angelina continued to fight. Maddox would actually go on to testify against his father in divorce court, and the two are reportedly still not on speaking terms. In May of the following year, in an interview with GQ magazine, Pitt opened up about his drinking for the first time. He also revealed that he had been sober for 6 months. Quote, "I can't remember a day since I got out of college when I wasn't boozing or had a spliff or something, and I'm running from feelings. I'm really happy to be done with all of that. I stopped everything except boozing when I started my family. But even this last year, things I wasn't dealing with. I was just boozing too much. It's just become a problem. And I'm really happy it's been half a year now, which is bittersweet, but I've got my feelings in my fingertips again." Asked if he missed drinking, Pitt explained how his drinking had gotten out of hand. He said, "I mean, we have a winery. I enjoy wine very much, but I just ran it to the ground. I had to step away for a minute, and truthfully, I could drink a Russian under the table with his own vodka. I was a professional. I was good." When the reporter asked him what he had replaced the booze with, Pitt's answer was disarmingly simple: cranberry juice and fizzy water. In a 2019 interview with the New York Times, the star would go into more details about his journey to sobriety, describing how he had spent a year and a half in Alcoholics Anonymous. The groups that he attended were all male. Quote, "You had all of these men sitting around and being open and honest in a way that I have never heard before. It was this safe space where there was little judgment and therefore little judgment of yourself. It was actually really freeing just to expose the ugly sides of yourself. There's great value in that." Here's what he had to say that same year in an interview with CNN's Christine Amanpour.
"I was running to things to avoid tough feelings, painful feelings. I just didn't know how to deal with them, and looking for anything I found that I use for escape, those kinds of, I guess, difficult feelings. I don't know how better to describe it. I mean, that can be anything. That can be drugs, booze, Netflix, snacks, anything. I don't want to, at this point, to be running from anything. I want to sit in it. I want to feel it. I want to get through the rough night. And I found, in doing so, you come out the other side with a more profound understanding of yourself, a greater gratefulness for those in your life, and the birds and the trees and everything else."
After becoming sober, Brad was able to make a number of positive changes in his life, including making amends with his ex-wife, Jennifer Aniston. According to a source, Brad apologized to her for many things that had happened during their relationship and took ownership of their mistakes. The two are now reportedly good friends. Ben Affleck bust onto the Hollywood scene with his 1997 film Good Will Hunting. He not only acted in the film, but he also co-wrote the script with Matt Damon. Since then, he's had many massive box office hits including Armageddon, Pearl Harbor, The Town, Batman vs Superman, and many more. Over the years, Affleck has gradually transitioned from acting to producing films, such as Gone Baby Gone and Argo. His net worth today is at a whopping estimated $150 million. Now, astonishingly, Affleck has accomplished all of this against a decade-long backdrop of alcohol addiction. He got his first stint at rehab in 2001 at the age of 29. It was a 30-day program at the Promises Clinic in Malibu. At the time, the treatment cost was $30,000. Today, it would be between $50,000 to $90,000. Among other treatments, the facility offers acupuncture, nutritional counseling, fitness, art therapy, and quote, equine-assisted therapy.
When I was younger, in 2001, which I now look at as a sort of a JV version of what really a problem is. I was sober for a couple of years, and then I thought, I want to just drink like a normal person, and I want to have wine at dinner and so on. And I was able to. I was able to for about 8 years.
So what happened is he went back to drinking socially. He credits his wife at the time, Jennifer Garner, for being a positive influence on him. According to him, it was being around Garner that allowed him to keep his drinking under control. Or so he thought, for another 8 years.
I started to drink more and more and more, and it was really hard for me to accept that meant I was an alcoholic. I was like, I can just go back. I was fine before. I just need to take a break. I just need to slow down. I'm okay. You know what I mean? This isn't me. And I started to drink every day.
Sadly, the marriage with Garner slowly deteriorated, and the couple separated in 2015, and he went back to rehab in 2017. This time, the treatment lasted for around 3 months. Around this time, Affleck was also seen in public with a sobriety coach. Her job was, quote, to make sure that he stays on the right path. This time around, his sober spell was even more brief. In September of the following year, he completed his 3rd rehab stint. 40 days in a clinic, followed by outpatient care. Now, as rehab clinics come, this one was about as luxurious as it gets. The Canyon at Pitt Park, an exclusive 240-acre facility with stunning views of the mountain and ocean. It features outdoor pools, trails, and access to a beach. Residents there have access to a psychiatrist, a therapist, and an internist. The center reportedly offers various therapies, including 12-step, cognitive behavioral therapy, family therapy, and more. A 30-day stay there cost around $60,000. After his stay at the Canyon, in an Instagram post, Affleck thanked his family, colleagues, and fans for their support. He then went on to say, battling any addiction is a lifelong and difficult struggle. Because of that, one is never really in or out of treatment. It is a full-time commitment. I am fighting for myself and my family. This is quite an interesting statement, and I'll come back to that in a little while. But for now, let's just stick with the timeline. In October 2019, TMZ broke a disturbing footage of him stumbling around after a night out. Very encouragingly, the following morning, Affleck was met by reporters outside of his house. And he described the incident as a, quote, slip, but I'm not going to let it derail me.
It happens to slip, but I'm not going to let it derail me.
In a later New York Times interview, he had the following to say about it. Relapse is embarrassing, obviously. I wish that it didn't happen. I really wish that it wasn't on the internet for my kids to see. Jen and I did our best to address it and be honest. And to the best of our knowledge, that was the last time that he drank, meaning that he's been sober for close to 2 years now, and I definitely wish him and his family all the best. Now, we did recently make another video on the drinking problem of another Hollywood star, Bradley Cooper, and if you watched that video, you might have already been struck by how dramatically different his road to sobriety was. Not just the fact that he stopped cold turkey and hasn't had a single drink in over 15 years, but it was the massive qualitative difference in his perception of actually stopping. Let's see how he describes it.
In your late 20s, you stopped drinking.
Stop drinking, yeah.
Very difficult?
No, beautiful. Unbelievable.
Better.
Oh, are you kidding? I would never be sitting here with you. No way, no chance.
So with Affleck, you have the story of a constant struggle on the one hand. In and out of rehab, slipping up, getting back on the straight and narrow, and then back to square one all over again. And he himself describes the journey as something difficult, lifelong, and full-time. In an interview to The Hollywood Reporter of February this year, Affleck described himself yet again as a, quote, recovering alcoholic, even though he hasn't drank since 2019. Again, compare that to Cooper, who describes the process as beautiful and unbelievable. Now, just for a second, I want you to think, which of these two stars actually has a better chance of staying sober for the rest of their lives? If you ask me, Cooper has had a realization that he's seen alcohol for what it is. Without even probably realizing it, he must have applied some style of first principles thinking. He must have broke things down and then really just uncovered the truth for himself. And when that happens, it's just effortless. It's easy to stop. It's just like a logical decision. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, Affleck seems to be going the common route. He's reasoning from analogy. He's doing the traditional 12-step approach, calling himself the problem, recovery for the rest of his life. And sadly, we're seeing the difference in results. Now, don't get me wrong, Some people will go through recovery, they'll go through a 12-step meeting for the rest of their life, and they will get results. Who knows, maybe Affleck had to go through his process, and now he's going to stay there for the rest of his life, but he's going to be happy. But in my experience, and in a lot of people that I've spoken to, that 12-step program, the traditional way, the therapy, it just wasn't working long-term. It all comes to changing the way that you view alcohol. Now, I do want to close this video with a quote from Ben Affleck himself. If you have a problem, getting help is a sign of courage, not weakness or failure. In other words, it's okay to ask for help. Meet Adam Wiles, aka Calvin Harris. From humble beginnings, posting tracks on his MySpace page, Harris has gone on to become one of the most commercially successful DJs and record producers of all time. After 2 well-received first albums, it was his third attempt, 2012's 18 Months, which propelled him to international superstardom. Featuring such dance floor anthems as Bounce and We Found Love, the album and the singles it spawned would go on to break several commercial records and make Harris a household name worldwide. As one critic described it, all of the album's tracks were, quote, vying to be the tune you most wanted to be dancing to when the realization hits that you're out, the night is young, and everything is brilliant. Harris has since gone on to release numerous other successful hits and establish himself as arguably the top DJ in the world. Now, all of this success has made Harris a very wealthy man. A regular fixture on the Forbes highest earning celebrity list, his net worth is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Along with the fame and fortune, Harris has also enjoyed the company of many beautiful women throughout the years. The 38-year-old has been romantically linked to singers Taylor Swift and Ellie Goulding, Russian model Anne Vyatsliana, and was recently engaged to British DJ Vicky Hope. Hope, now 32, reportedly turned him down the first time he asked her out, fully 13 years earlier. As they say, nothing worth having comes easy. In early 2022, Harris put up his luxurious 10-bedroom Beverly Hills mansion for sale at a whopping asking price of $25 million and splashed out on a 138-hectare farm in Ibiza. I may be pronouncing this incorrectly, but Terra Mazia is billed as the largest organic farm on the island, boasting a range of organic vegetables, eggs and wine. It also hosts special events like weddings. Now, the 38-year-old superstar reportedly spends most of his time on the farm along with his fiancée. In a 2009 interview with the BBC, Harris would declare that his party days were largely over and that he had stopped drinking. When asked why he stopped, his answer was very simple. Quote, I stopped drinking because it actually was making me ill. It was affecting my brain in the worst way. Harris would go on to lament the drinking culture of the DJ world, where bountiful quantities of alcohol were a permanent fixture. Quote, everywhere you go, there's a bottle of Jack Daniels. If you turn up for a DJ set, there are 2. You turn up for a band gig and there are 6. Where does it all go? Well, someone's got to drink it. That's the problem. It has got to leave the venue. They can't be left with booze. That's not the done thing. It ends up going back to the bus, and what do? Go to bed or drink it? Well, you drink it. It appears that Harris's decision to stop drinking did not last, and at some point after that interview, he started drinking again. In late 2014, the DJ abruptly pulled out of a scheduled performance at the MTV European Music Awards. In a tweet to his followers, the star announced that he had some issues with his heart and was returning home to address them. Though widely publicized at the time, the event was soon forgotten, and no further details were leaked to the public. A few years later, in 2018, Harris would open up about the events of 2014, revealing that he had been diagnosed with a dangerous irregular heartbeat. The irregularity eventually threatened to take his life, and Harris would end up being resuscitated at the ER after his heart completely gave out. From some of the comments around that time, we know that by 2014, Harris's drinking had gotten really bad, and it was very likely responsible for his heart issues. Here's what he tweeted in a reply to one of his followers. The last thing I want to do is down 2 bottles of Jack Daniels a night, live on Greg's pasties, and sleep on an absolutely stinking bus all year, scream down a mic for 55 minutes, and pretend to play a keyboard 5 times a week. Those days are behind me, son. In another tweet, the star confirmed that he had not touched alcohol, nor had had an arrhythmia in 4 years. Harris's health scare, an irregular heartbeat caused by excessive alcohol consumption, is actually a relatively common phenomenon. Alcohol is toxic to the heart and upsets the electrophysiological environment of the heart cells, sometimes to the extent of inducing an irregular heartbeat. Doctors used to call this holiday heart, after noticing it often affected people returning from binge drinking holidays. The scientific medical term is atrial fibrillation, and as we just saw, it can have life-threatening consequences. To develop atrial fibrillation, you do not even have to be a chronic drinker. It can even be triggered by short bouts of binge drinking in so-called social drinkers. Fortunately, it will typically resolve on its own after cessation of alcohol. If the person keeps on drinking, however, it can turn into a chronic problem, requiring sustained medical intervention. Born in Dublin, Ireland in 1976, Colin Farrell was at a point being groomed to become a singer. Believe it or not, he actually auditioned for the famous Irish boy band Boyzone. The person who spotted him and brought him in for the audition was none other than Louis Walsh of X Factor fame. Fortunately for us, Colin couldn't sing to save his life, so his singing career was dead before it even started. Shortly after that, he attended acting school, and before long his acting career started to take off. He had his first major Hollywood role in 2000, when he played an army recruit in Joel Schumacher's Tigerland. But most of you probably first saw him in 2002's Minority Report, where he starred alongside Tom Cruise. Over the next few years, he would go on to have a string of major Hollywood roles, including 2004's Alexander and 2006 Miami Vice. But throughout all this, Colin was struggling with addiction. Since being a teenager, he had been drinking non-stop for 18 years. Here's how he once described it. For a long time, I put the brakes on. I could go mad for 3-6 months, and then I could pull back for a few months to try and re-enter the atmosphere. I just couldn't find the handbrake. In another interview, he talked about how he would mix alcohol with other drugs. When I ever drink with my mates, we'd go to a pub on a Wednesday night and have 6 pints, and everybody would go home. I'd get a bag of powder, 4 joints and a bottle of Jack Daniels and drank until 5 in the morning. In a 2017 interview with the Irish Sun, he opened up about how he now views some of the dark days. Quote, "I wouldn't change anything in the past because then I wouldn't be here today. But there are times in the past where I hurt people and that I wish I could take back. And you can't. All you can do going forward is become a better person and learn from that and not hurt anybody in the same way that you did in the past. That's my personal karma." After drinking for close to 2 decades, Farrell finally stopped in 2006. Here's how it happened. Whilst he was filming Miami Vice, he felt that things got really out of hand. As he describes it, when he went to watch the movie's premiere, it was one of the most bizarre experiences of his life. He was watching himself on the screen, but couldn't remember shooting a single scene of it. Straight after that, he got on a plane and went to rehab. In a 2010 interview, Farrell elaborated on his sobriety. "I'm just grateful that I'm actually alive," he said, adding that sobriety had given him back, quote, 8 hours a day now that I didn't have before when I was drinking every day for 18 years. What he really singled out in the interview was the amount of lying that he had to do to keep his addiction alive. Quote, "The amount of energy that you have to put in and the amount of lies that you have to tell to keep a drug habit alive, it's fairly significant. Basically, your whole life is a lie." As we saw, a big motivation for Colin to change his life around was the birth of his son James in 2003. This was from his then girlfriend at the time, Kim Bordenave. The couple had since been divorced. Colin would go on to have another child with Polish actress Alicia Bachleder. In 2018, a full 12 years since his first rehab, Colin checked himself into rehab once again. Nope, he hadn't had a relapse. He hasn't had a drink since 2006. But after a crazy schedule featuring 3 back-to-back movies, something didn't feel quite right. The Hollywood star was concerned about the pressure that he had been building up and he needed some time for himself. So he checked into rehab as a quote preventative measure. As a source close to the star told the British tabloid The Sun, quote, "He decided to preemptively check himself in before it went to a bad place. He didn't want to go down that rabbit hole once again." Now guys, I'm not sure about you, but I really respect and admire that decision. Knowing that if you don't get help, things can get worse, well, it takes a lot of courage to actually go and ask for that help. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section below. That'd be really cool to hear from you. Now, as you might have guessed, the clinic Colin checked himself into was not what you'd call cheap. At $36,000 a month, the Meadow Clinic in Wickenburg is one of the most expensive clinics in Arizona. Among the many programs on offer are horse riding, yoga, Tai Chi, acupuncture, neurofeedback, and meditation courses. Some of the facilities include a swimming pool, a fitness center, and relaxation areas. The program course runs for 45 days. Other celebrities who have visited the treatment center include Kevin Spacey, Tiger Woods, Naomi Campbell, and none other than Harvey Weinstein, who checked in there for sex addiction treatment. Farrell successfully completed his treatment and continues to enjoy close to a decade and a half of sobriety. Today, Farrell's net worth is estimated at $80 million and his primary residence is in Los Angeles, California. We look forward to seeing him on the big screen again in this year's The Batman. The film is slated to debut in early March. Eminem is undoubtedly the most successful rapper of all time. Actually, he is one of the most successful music artists of all time. Period. He sold around 250 million records worldwide. This puts him in the same leagues with the likes of Elton John, Madonna, and the Beatles. In the US, 10 of his albums have gone to #1. He's won more or less every music award that there is, including the 2003 Academy Award for his song Lose Yourself. This was the soundtrack to the partly autobiographical film 8 Mile, which was also a massive commercial hit. But before Eminem shot to fame with his 1999 album The Slim Shady LP, his life was anything but smooth sailing. His story is inspirational and tragic at the same time. Born in Missouri in 1972, his parents were divorced when he was 2 years of age. His mother was only 20 at the time. After the breakup, his father moved to California, where he fathered 2 more children with another woman. Whilst growing up, Eminem sent dozens of letters to his father, and they were all returned to sender. In 2001, 2 years after becoming famous, his father attempted to reach out to him. He told a UK tabloid, "I desperately want to meet my son and tell him that I love him. I'm not interested in his money. I just want to talk to him. I want him to know that I'm here for him if he lets me back into his life." Now, his father passed away in 2019. Despite his pleas, his famous son never saw him again. After his father left the home, his mother turned to drugs and alcohol. Eminem grew up in abject poverty. His mother hopped from one low-paying job to another, and the two of them spent years moving back and forth between Missouri and Michigan. Eminem claims that his mother was using heroin at the time, something which she strongly denied. He also claims she abused Valium, which she allegedly put in his food to get him to sleep. After Eminem became famous, he often criticized and ridiculed his mother in his songs. She filed a lawsuit against him in 1999. She asked for $10 million in damages for slander. Out of the $10 million, she ended up with $25,000, 23 of which went to her lawyer. Back to Eminem's childhood years. Due to constantly moving schools, he often ended up being bullied. In his own words, "I was beat up in the bathrooms, in the hallways, shoved in the lockers, for the most part for being the new kid." Predictably, he became a loner as a teenager and turned to rap for solace. His first album in 1996 was a complete flop, but it was his 1999 album, The Slim Shady LP, that turned him into an overnight superstar. Over the next 3 years, he released 2 more massively selling albums, establishing himself as the most influential musician in the world. But hidden behind all of this success and money was a very different story, one of depression, failing an addiction to prescription painkillers and sedatives. Now, in the summer of 2005, Eminem abruptly cancelled his scheduled European tour, citing exhaustion and, quote, other medical issues. But it was soon revealed that he had entered rehab to kick his drug problems. In an interview with GQ, he went into details about his experience at the rehab. "Every addict in rehab feels like everybody's staring at them. With me, everybody was staring at me. I could never be comfortable. There were people there that treated me normally, and then there were a bunch of idiots who aren't even concentrating on their own sobriety because they're so worried about mine. They were stealing my hats, my books, it was chaos. Everything was drama in there. And at the time, I didn't really want to get clean. Everybody else wanted me to. And anyone will tell you that if you're not ready, nothing is going to change you." Now, it didn't take long after rehab for him to relapse again. In 2006, his close friend and collaborator, rapper Proof, was shot and killed outside of a Detroit nightclub. This devastated the famous singer, sending him even deeper into depression. Alongside the drug abuse, his health was also failing. Eminem became a recluse in his Michigan mansion, binging on takeaway every single day. His weight shot up to 230 pounds at only 5'8". In an interview with Rolling Stones magazine, he opened up about his weight problems. He said, "I got up to between 220 and 230, about 80 pounds heavier than I am now. I was going to McDonald's and Taco Bell every day. I got so heavy that people started to not recognize me. I remember being somewhere and overhearing these kids talking. One of them said, 'That's Eminem.' And then the other said, 'No, he's not, man. Eminem ain't fat.' I was like, That's when I knew I was getting heavy. Now guys, you've probably already figured out that his sleep was seriously messed up too. Reportedly, he could manage about 2 hours of sleep straight. He'd then have to take more pills to go back to sleep. In 2007, he overdosed on methadone pills and was urgently admitted to hospital. It later surfaced that the amount that he had taken was equivalent to 4 bags of heroin. Now, remarkably, after all of this, it only took him a month to relapse yet again. In 2008, the superstar had finally had enough and he decided to turn the corner. How exactly did he do it? Interestingly, no rehabs, no clinics, nothing. What he did is he hired an addiction counselor who he continued to see once a week for years afterwards. As you can imagine, the process was excruciating. Eminem has stated that he couldn't sleep for 3 weeks straight. He was up day and night watching the TV and walking around like a zombie. Now, at the same time that he was going through all of this, Eminem reached out to another music legend, Sir Elton John. With 3 decades of sobriety under his belt, Elton John was the best friend and mentor Eminem could have hoped for. The two first met in 2001 and developed a close bond that has lasted decades. Elton John would call Eminem weekly and support him on the path to recovery. To fill in the space previously taken by the pills, Eminem developed a new addiction, a far healthier one this time: exercise. He reportedly ran 17 miles a day on the treadmill, 8.5 in the morning before hitting the studio and another 8.5 in the evening. His weight went down to 149 pounds, which is what he walks around at to this day. Though he has made a full recovery from addiction, the superstar says that the years of drug abuse have taken their toll. He blames the sleeping pill Ambien in particular for wiping out long stretches of his memory. Nowadays, Eminem spends his time between his 2 Michigan mansions. He's now a very private person, so not much information leaks out about his personal life.
So, born in London in 1986, Christopher Catesby Harrington had a relatively uneventful childhood. Coming from a middle-class family, he got involved with acting as a teenager and performed with his school theatre. After high school, he attended drama school in London at the university level, graduating in 2008. After some minor roles, he would get his big break in 2011. That was the year that he was cast as Jon Snow in the HBO fantasy series Game of Thrones, also my favourite series of all time. The show would go on to run for 8 seasons. In the process, it would shatter all sorts of viewership records and go down in history as one of the most successful television series ever. Widely praised by critics for his performance as Snow, Harrington ended up becoming one of the highest paid actors on television. At one point, he was reportedly collecting $2 million per episode. He would also go on to star in a number of films on the big screen, one of those recently being 2021 Marvel Comics superhero film Eternals. You might have also heard him lend his voice in the 2nd and 3rd installment of DreamWorks' smash hit franchise, How to Train Your Dragon. Now, all of these successful ventures have made the 36-year-old a very wealthy man, and he is now sitting on top of an estimated fortune of $14 million. Harrington spends his free time in his lavish estate in the English countryside. He purchased this in 2017 for a reported $2.1 million, and he lives there with his wife, Game of Thrones co-star Rose Leslie. After playing the part of on-screen lovers in the 2nd season of the series, the pair would go on to date in real life, before eventually tying the knot in 2018. A few weeks before the 8th and final season of Game of Thrones ended, it was revealed that Harrington was actually headed to rehab. In a statement to the press, his rep stated, quote, "Kit has decided to utilize this break in his schedule as an opportunity to spend some time at a wellness retreat to work on some personal issues." Now, from sources close to the star, it would soon be leaked that he was battling with a drinking problem as well as stress. You see, the end of the series was looming as a landmark of immense significance in his life. According to a clinical psychologist who commented on the story at the time, the loss of a gig as big as a leading role in Game of Thrones, along with all the fame and status, can be immense. So immense, actually, that it's hard for regular people who have never been in that position to even imagine. Now, another reason for the timing of Harrington's rehab might have been, well, more practical. As Game of Thrones wound down, the star might have finally had some time to reflect and then address his personal issues. Ironically, things were aggravated by the fact that in later seasons of the show, Harrington's character, Jon Snow, would be smack in the center of the series spotlight. Whilst in the early seasons, his character was just one amongst many. Later on, he became central to the narrative. During an interview at the same year he entered rehab, he had this to say: "When you become the cliffhanger of a TV show, and a TV show probably at the height of its power, the focus on you is terrifying. To those who had been paying attention, there were signs that something was not quite right in the star's life. In 2018, Harrington got kicked out of a New York pool bar for being loud and aggressive. And in other photographs that would surface over the coming weeks, Harrington could be seen on the streets of Paris, apparently intoxicated, stumbling around in front of oncoming cars. His stay at the luxury Connecticut rehab, Privé Suisse, would not come cheap. With a price tag of around $120,000 a month, this facility prides itself on, quote, private, sequestered, all one-to-one customer clinical and holistic care. Privé Suisse do not advertise, nor do they have much of a social media presence. Their reputation grows by word of mouth in the circles of CEOs, Hollywood stars, and other celebrities. The facilities and services include a fitness studio, Pilates, acupuncture, infrared sauna, therapeutic massages, and more. And details of Harrington's stay at Privé Suisse were few and hard to come by. But what we do know is that his treatment was successful, and by all accounts, he has not had a drink since. In a 2021 interview with the Sunday Times, the star would open up about his addiction troubles and his path to sobriety. He admitted to dealing with depression so severe that it made him think the unthinkable. And here's the crazy thing, when he was asked if he had ever considered suicide, he didn't mince his words. Quote, I will give you an answer to that question, and the answer is yes. Yes, of course. I went through periods of real depression where I wanted to do all sorts of things. Though he did avoid disclosing details about the particular events that led him to rehab, Harrington was very forthcoming with regards to the main takeaway from sobriety. In one word, change. Quote, one of my favorite things that I learned recently is that the expression, a leopard doesn't change its spots, is completely false. That a leopard actually does change its spots. I just think that's the most beautiful thing. It really helped. That was something I kind of clung onto. The idea that I could make this huge, fundamental change in who I was and how I went about my life. In another interview around this time, the star revealed that after the Game of Thrones finale, he took a break from working for a full year. The time to unwind and work on himself would turn out to be very beneficial. To aid in his recovery, Harrington can count on the support of his loving wife, Rose Leslie. In an interview with Harper's Bazaar, Leslie would reveal that she had found value support in Al-Anon. This is an organization for relatives and loved ones of people struggling with addiction. But for all of her love and the support of the Al-Anon community, she recognizes that at its core, Harrington's sobriety is all down to him. Quote, no amount of nannying is going to be able to stop him from doing what he decides to do. I don't choose to put that pressure on myself. The responsibility of his behavior is on him. It's not on me to guard him from it. From a young age, Megan Fox was only interested in one thing: acting. She began to train in drama at the age of 5, and in her early teens was already an acting professional. She played in her first film when she was only 15. Alongside acting, her modeling career also took off relatively quickly. But despite the quick fame, her early years were not exactly smooth sailing for the young Megan. Born in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in 1986, her parents divorced when she was only 3. Her mother then had to work a variety of odd jobs to make ends meet. Eventually, she would remarry, and the family would move to Florida. Her stepfather was very strict, and her mother not particularly supportive of her daughter's acting aspirations. She was also bullied at school, with other kids singling her out for wanting to be an actress. The star has also been vocal about her experiences with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which in her case manifests as a pathological fear of germs. Moreover, she struggles with body dysmorphic disorder. This is when people become overly obsessed with minor flaws in their body, which they then perceive as disfiguring. Quote, we may look at somebody and think, that person is so beautiful. Their life must be so easy. They most likely don't feel that way about themselves. In another interview, she would add, I'm really insecure about everything. Never think I'm worthy of anything. I have a sick feeling of being mocked all the time. I have a lot of self-loathing. Her unhappiness over her image is probably part of the reason behind her rumoured multiple plastic surgeries. It also helps to explain her bizarre interview at the 2009 Golden Globes, which we'll come to shortly. Now, by 2007, Fox had appeared in a few films and television series, but was still a relatively unknown actress. That year, everything changed. Starring alongside Shia LaBeouf, The young actress was cast as Michaela Bain, his sexy classmate who helps him save the Earth from the evil Decepticons. Now, this film would go on to gross an astonishing $700 million worldwide, making it one of the most successful films of that year. The second installment, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, followed 2 years later. Now, this would go on to surpass the original film commercially, grossing over $800 million. For a while, Megan Fox was one of the hottest commodities in Hollywood. Unfortunately for Fox, in an interview with Wonderland magazine later that year, she compared the franchise's director, Michael Bay, to Adolf Hitler. This was in reference to his strict and disciplined style of running his sets. She was fired from the franchise, and her career never became quite as successful as it could have been. In 2009, Fox attended the Golden Globes event in Beverly Hills. She was seated alongside Blake Lively and the Jonas Brothers, and the waiters placed giant glasses of champagne on the table. By her own account, she had far too many glasses to drink that night. When a reporter interviewed her later in the night, this is what happened.
The hottest women in the business right now, Megan Fox with me now. Why do you shake your head?
Because I'm pretty sure I'm a doppelganger for Alan Alda.
Oh, God, out of here.
I'm a tranny. I'm a man.
You do not look in the mirror and not think you're beautiful. Don't even.
No, I'm so painfully insecure. Like, I'm on the verge of vomiting right now. I'm so horrified that I'm here and embarrassed and scared.
Is this your first time here?
Yeah, it's my first time.
I love you're watching the monitor. You're looking at Selma Hayek going, God, look how gorgeous she is. Have you looked at yourself lately?
I really want her boobs. Those are the most amazing boobs. Perfect.
You want her boobs, I want your boobs. There, we're all even.
All right, we'll trade.
Is your man, Brian Austin Green, here tonight?
He's not. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to be my date. He's a man. He has an ego.
So he's watching, maybe?
I think he's probably working on music. I don't think he cares.
For those of you who don't know, Alan Alda is an American actor now in his 80s. Now, unlike many of the other celebrities that we've covered on this channel already, Megan Fox never had a life and death problem with drinking. There were no serious health issues, no troubles with the law, no disintegration of personal relationships with loved ones, or any of that stuff. It was just, well, stuff like what we just saw. Drinking too much, saying and doing stupid things and coming to regret them. Then having the realization one day that you just don't have to put yourself through all of this. There is simply no need to drink at all. And sometime after the Golden Globes incident, Fox then made the decision to cut alcohol out of her life. In subsequent interviews, she describes her comments at the event as belligerent and admitted that they got her in a lot of trouble with the press. In an interview with Glamour magazine, she used the following analogy for alcohol. Quote, when I was in Costa Rica, somebody described the purpose of alcohol with plant medicine. You use alcohol to extract the essence of a plant. And I thought, that is exactly how alcohol makes me feel, as though it's extracting my essence, which is why I have avoided it for so long. Now, as you might have guessed by her figure, strict alcohol avoidance is only one aspect of the star's health and wellness lifestyle. She also doesn't smoke and drinks a maximum of 1 cup of coffee a day. She also has a very strict, clean diet without breads or processed carbohydrates. So no crackers, pretzels, french fries, any of that stuff. And apparently there are no cheat days. And then there's exercise, where Fox follows a strict workout regimen of circuit training. This is a workout style where you go from one exercise to the next with very little rest in between. And as we saw earlier, Fox also enjoys Pilates.
So, nowadays, Robert Downey Jr. is easily one of the biggest Hollywood stars, certainly amongst the highest paid ones. Just for his role in the 2018 Avengers Infinity Wars, he ended up earning around $75 million. In one interview, he mentioned that production studios view his salary not as an actor's compensation, but as a strategic cost. His net worth today stands at a whopping $300 million. This puts him ahead of the likes of Bruce Willis, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Harrison Ford. It's pretty impressive considering he had to come back from the brink of unemployment and bankruptcy, which I'll come to shortly. Now, Downey Jr. comes from an acting family and started acting himself when he was only 5. If you're into your 80s movies, then you probably remember him from films like Weird Science or The Pickup Artist. In 1992, his performance in Chaplin earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, and the sky appeared to be the limit for this young actor. This all started to fall apart in 1996 when he had his first of several run-ins with the law. In June of that year, he was arrested for felony possession of cocaine and heroin after the cops searched his car on a speeding violation. They also found a loaded gun in the car. The next month, the police arrested him again after he bizarrely slipped into a neighbour's house and passed out in the bedroom. He was arrested yet again the next month and sentenced to 3 years probation after pleading no contest. He eventually spent 4 months in county jail in 1998. The following year, after missing multiple drug tests as part of his probation, his luck finally ran out and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. In sentencing him, the judge said, "I don't think we have any alternatives. We have used them all." After time already served and allowances for good behaviour, he ended up serving only a year in Corcoran State Prison. Whilst in prison, he worked 5 days a week in the canteen. His 8 cents an hour job included doling out food, washing dishes and scraping pans. Now, when he got out, he went straight back to acting, this time in the television series Ally McBeal. But by that point, he admits he hated acting and he just wanted to go through the motions. Along with acting, Downey also went straight back to drinking and doing drugs. Finding the drugs wasn't that difficult, as he had stashed away a handsome supply before getting locked up. Over the next few months, he was arrested again for possession and other violations on multiple occasions. And indeed, he was very lucky to escape a new prison sentence. The only reason was the passing in California of Proposition 36 in the year 2000. With Proposition 36, non-violent drug offenders would spend their time in drug treatment programs rather than prison. By that time, however, Hollywood had had enough. After yet another drug-related arrest in July 2001, the producers of Ally McBeal quickly fired Downey and rewrote the script to the remaining episodes. At this point, his wife had also had enough. She left him, taking their only son with him. Now, just to make matters worse, Downey had unpaid taxes and he was on the brink of bankruptcy. His prospects of sorting out his finances were also bleak. Not only did Hollywood not trust him anymore, but his insurance premiums to work on a movie were now prohibitively high. His acting days appeared to be over, and he was the poster boy for wasted potential. Now, we will get to the story about Downey's recovery shortly, but first I want to take a closer look at how he developed his addiction in the first place. Unsurprisingly, his parents also had addiction issues, and Downey grew up in an environment where alcohol and illicit substances were rife. Believe it or not, his father actually allowed him to try cannabis when he was just 8 years old. This was obviously in the form of a joke, but was something that his dad would come to regret bitterly over the years. In Downey Jr.'s words, "There was always a lot of pot and coke around. When my dad and I would do drugs together, it was like him trying to express his love for me in the only way that he knew how." He talks about being regularly drunk as a child and teenager, also making thousands of phone calls to score some drugs. Now, in 1987, he played the role of a junkie in the film Less Than Zero. His character's addiction spirals out of control, leading to debts, being disowned from his wealthy family, and eventually death. Ironically, that film accelerated his own addiction problems. Several years later, Downey would describe his time on the set of that film, quote, "Until that movie, I took my drugs after work and on the weekends. Maybe I'd turn up hungover on the set, but no more than the stuntman. That changed on Less Than Zero. I was playing this junkie, and for me, the role was like the ghost of Christmas Future. The character was an exaggeration of myself, then things changed, and in some ways, I became an exaggeration of the character." In 1993, after getting married for the first time, Downey promised his wife that he would clean up, but that only lasted a year. By 1995, he had switched from cocaine to heroin and was drinking more than ever. Excluding his time behind bars, his drinking and drug habits would go on for the next 8 years. So, we come finally to 2003, where Downey would turn his life around forever. That same year, on the set of the movie Gothica, he would meet his future wife, Susan Levin. Susan gave him an ultimatum: sober up or say goodbye. According to the famous actor, the old saying is true: behind every good man, there's an incredible woman. I owe a huge amount, if not all of my success to Susan. We make a great team. In another interview, he said, "Whatever I was hungry for when I met Susan, I couldn't have known how much more satisfying what I got would be." Now, Susan's influence and ultimatum was certainly the central element to his recovery. But believe it or not, the straw that broke the camel's back was some nasty tasting fast food. In an interview with Britain's Empire magazine, Downey recounted the very last day that he used drugs in 2003. As he told the story, he was driving a car piled up with, quote, tons of fucking dope, where he pulled over for a burger. He went on, "I have to thank Burger King. It was such a disgusting burger that I had ordered. I had that and this big soda and I thought something really bad was going to happen." He tossed all his drugs into the ocean and that was it. He never used again. Alongside his wife's support, Downey also credits his sobriety to a combination of 12-step programs, meditation, and martial arts. But above all, he says the most important thing is making the decision to stop. Once you decide that and reach out for help, the rest will follow. His drinking days over, Downey still had a dead acting career to revive. Fortunately for him, his colleague and friend Mel Gibson personally underwrote Downey's liability insurance. That meant that if Downey relapsed again and made a mess of production, Gibson himself would be on the hook for the insurance payout. Talk about having a good friend when you need one. Now, Gibson's intervention allowed Robert to start taking Hollywood roles again, though at pennies compared to what he was previously making. Over the next 5 years, he collected modest paychecks to appear in films like A Scanner Darkly and Zodiac. In 2008, he agreed to take the lead role in Marvel's Iron Man for a mere $500,000. The movie shattered all box office expectations, grossing close to $600 million worldwide. That same year, he was nominated for a second Academy Award for his role in Tropic Thunder, and the rest was history. He and Susan now have 2 kids and spend most of their time in their Hamptons mansion, which is, believe it or not, a restored 19th century windmill house. His upcoming comedy, All-Star Weekend, will see him star alongside Jamie Foxx. There is no release date as of yet. Elton John came into this world in 1947 in Middlesex, England, as Reginald Kenneth Dwight. He started playing piano at a young age and won a scholarship to the Royal Academy at only 11 years old. By that time, he was already composing songs. He would go on to study at the Academy for 5 years. At around 20 years old, the young Reginald changed his name to Elton John. In interviews, he has said that he just didn't like Reginald and had unhappy memories from the name. His second album, which released in 1970, made it all the way to number 4 on the US charts. In 1972, he had his first US number 1 album. He would follow that up with 7 consecutive number 1 albums. But it was his 1973 work in Goodbye Yellow Brick Road that established him as arguably the number 1 musical star in the world. The album sold more than 30 million copies worldwide, and to this day is regarded as his best piece of work. The rest was history. He would go on to sell over 300 million records, amass a fortune of $500 million, earn a knighthood, and touch the hearts of millions of people around the world. But from mid-1970s all the way to 1990, while his career was soaring, Elton John was losing the battle with addiction. Prior to entering the world of music, he says that he had no experience with drugs. His first encounter with cocaine was in 1974, when his manager brought it into the recording studio. In interviews, he's mentioned that he doesn't remember exactly why he joined in, whether it was bravado or stupidity. Whatever the case, the first line of cocaine started a process of addiction that would last almost 2 decades. The way he describes it, the cocaine helped him overcome the shyness. It was the drug that he felt helped him open up and talk to people. Of course, it wasn't long before the drug started to have the exact opposite effect, leading him to retreat from the world and isolate himself at home. Apart from cocaine, his other major addiction was drinking. In a 2010 interview with Piers Morgan, he described a typical day in his life. I'd stay up, I'd smoke joints, I'd drink a bottle of Johnny Walker, and then I'd stay up for 3 days, and then I'd go to sleep for a day and a half, and get up because I was so hungry because I hadn't eaten anything. I'd binge and have like 3 bacon sandwiches, a pot of ice cream, and then I'd throw it up because I became bulimic. And then I'd go and do the whole thing over and over again. Now, his addiction nearly cost him his life, and on his own account, he came close to death on a number of occasions. Quote, I would have an epileptic seizure and turn blue, and people would find me on the floor and put me to bed. And then 40 minutes later, I'd be snorting another line. A good question is how all this alcohol and drug abuse actually interfered with his work. He says he was never particularly drunk whilst performing, but he would take cocaine prior to coming on the stage. And ironically, he thinks it's the fact that he was able to perform and keep on making hits for so long that kept him blind to his problems. Adding to that was the fact that he was able to stop for short periods of time. This gave him the illusion of control. But when he he started using again, it would invariably be worse than before. Now, 1990 was the year that he finally sobered up, and it was the death of a teenage boy that served as the catalyst. Ryan White was a hemophiliac teenager from Indiana. In 1984, at only 13 years of age, he was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, which he contracted from tainted blood products. When his school found out, they banned him, and his mother started a lengthy administrative process to have him reinstated. Ryan and his family's struggles attracted the attention of celebrities and politicians, including Michael Jackson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, President Reagan, and more. But out of all of the celebrities, it was Elton John who struck up the closest friendship with the teen, even spending time with him at his deathbed in hospital. At Ryan's funeral, Elton was the pallbearer and he performed his song Skyline Pigeon. Ryan's death was a catalyst for changing public perceptions about HIV and AIDS. Soon afterwards, Congress passed the Ryan White Care Act, which created federal funding for sufferers of the condition. Little did Sir Elton know that the funeral would also be a major turning point in his own life.
Bottom for me was being with Ryan White the week he died in Indianapolis, seeing his family so dignified, forgiving people that had been horrible to them, losing a child and having so much dignity, whereas I, in my life, would complain about everything. And I just knew at that point that my life was out of whack. I knew beforehand, but that was the point I really realized it. And months after that, I got sober and clean. That was a real big turning point for me. I knew I had a problem, and the hardest thing for me was I thought I could solve everything myself. You know, I can do this. I'm intelligent. Right. I'm wealthy. I'm rich. I'm successful. Why can't I do this? I can do this. I couldn't. And for 16 years, I couldn't say, I need help. You know, those 3 words which will save your life, I need help. And as soon as I said that, I was away and haven't looked back since.
Later that year, he checked into a Chicago rehab clinic. The problem he faced in finding a suitable clinic was that he needed somewhere that could deal with a drug, alcohol, and food addiction at the same time. Because by that point, his problems with bulimia had gotten out of hand. And the Parkside Lutheran Hospital in Chicago was the one facility that fit the bill. He stayed there for 6 weeks, during which time he experienced, quote, inconceivably enormous cocaine cravings. After his 6 weeks were up and he was discharged, he took an entire year off. This is how he described that year off in an interview with Larry King. I took that whole next year off and did what people told me to do. I listened for the first time in a long time, and I spent a long time on my recovery, doing the things that I sometimes went kicking and screaming, but I did them because I was told to do them. And it worked. I put a lot of time and effort into it because you just don't reverse that behavior instantaneously. You just can't change it overnight. You have to learn to become a human being again, basically. In 1998, the star received a kinghood from Queen Elizabeth II, becoming, in effect, the Sir Elton John that we know today. And after the ceremony, he stood outside the palace to have a few words with the reporters. Quote, I've had a long career and worked hard, but I think that the turning point came in 1990 when I got sober and started to do some charity work, particularly for the AIDS problem. And knighthood is the icing on the cake. The flamboyant star has also had ups and downs in his personal life. He first came out as bisexual in 1976. In 1983, he met his first wife, the German Renate Blau. I think I pronounced that right. Renate was a sound engineer working on one of his albums. After a whirlwind romance that lasted a few months, he proposed to her in a romance and they tied the knot just 3 days later on Valentine's Day. Now, that marriage soon deteriorated. And by the time Elton threw an extravagant party to celebrate his 40th birthday in 1987, Renate did not even show up. They divorced the year after. After he sobered up, Elton John's personal life took a decisive turn for the better. In 1993, 3 years after rehab, he met the love of his life, David Furnish, at a dinner party that he held in his house. The two fell in love and entered a civil partnership in 2005. In 2014, when same-sex marriage was legalized in the UK, they got married. The couple are proud parents to 2 sons, Zachary 10 and Elijah 8. Both are from the same surrogate mother. In addition to his music, Sir Elton John is known for his vast philanthropic work. His Elton John AIDS Foundation, which he created shortly after Ryan White's death, is one of the largest fundraisers and advocacy groups of its kind worldwide. In its 3 decades of operations, it has raised close to $400 million to fight the good cause. His Elton John Charitable Trust makes charitable contributions outside of HIV and AIDS, and his Elton John Sports Fund supports Britain's most talented athletes from over 50 sports. But another way in which Sir Elton John has made a massive difference is by helping other celebrities who have struggled with addiction. He's actually acquired a bit of a reputation over the years as the go-to Hollywood helper for other celebrities dealing with their own addiction problems. As he once explained it, I suppose because I was a high-profile addict who turned his life around very publicly, I became somebody that my peers looked to if they had a problem. Some of the celebrities that he has helped are Donatella Versace, who struggled with cocaine, as well as Canadian artist Rufus Wainwright, who was heavily addicted to crystal meth. He has also been there to support his husband, David Furnish, when he checked into a rehab for his drinking in 2014. The famous singer even sat in with him at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting after David had finished rehab. Last but not least, he is Eminem's Alcoholics Anonymous sponsor. We recently made a video about Eminem's struggles with addiction, how he overcame them more than a decade ago, and how much of a role Elton John played in that. If you haven't checked out that one, click the link up here and I'll leave a link to it in the description if you want to see it after watching this video. You will love that one. I'd say Eminem's life story is as remarkable as a Hollywood script.
Now, before he became one of the world's most famous stuntmen, the world simply knew him as Stephen Glover. Born in London, England in 1974, the young Stephen's family moved around a lot, as his father was an executive for a multinational company. He spent his childhood in various countries, including Brazil, Venezuela, Canada, and the US. From a young age, he got into skateboarding. Then when he was 15, his father brought a video camera home. Before long, Stephen had married his passion for skateboarding with his newfound love of the camera. The following years would see him filming himself non-stop doing skateboarding tricks and various other stunts. And he was also exposed to alcohol from a very young age. His mother was a problem drinker who struggled through several failed sobriety attempts. In interviews, he has described her abstaining for lengthy periods, only to then stay drunk for days or weeks on end. Sadly, she would eventually die a slow and agonizing death from an aneurysm, something which would haunt Steve-O for many years. After finishing school, in 1992, Steve enrolled at the University of Miami to study advertising. He quickly realized that this was not going to work out. He had been smoking cannabis for 2 years straight, and by that point, his use had gotten so bad that he couldn't even physically attend most classes. Aside from drinking and cannabis, he also took LSD, though he experimented with pretty much anything he could get his hands on. He dropped out of university after 1 year, at which point he had decided that he wanted to make a career out of shooting crazy videos. Unsurprisingly, everyone he shared that plan with thought he was nuts, including his girlfriend at the time, who quickly dumped him. For the first 3 years after dropping out of college, Steve-O describes himself as homeless and in high gear, constantly filming stunts. Eventually, he heard about a private clown college without tuition fees and quickly applied. Yep, you heard that right, a clown college. After completing his training there, Steve-O worked as a clown for a flea market circus in Fort Lauderdale. Now, by that point, he was fully addicted to cocaine. His shows were on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and by his own account, he would do cocaine non-stop and not sleep through those 3 days. Around this time, he was also hospitalized multiple times after harming himself whilst drunk. On one occasion, he fell headfirst from a balcony onto the concrete below, resulting in 7 broken teeth. He was still in the cast from that fall when he got arrested for DUI. As a condition for his mother bailing him out of jail, he agreed to go to rehab. Unfortunately, the only reason he went was to make his mother happy, as he didn't even feel like he had a problem at the time. And the results were entirely predictable. Now, after sending TV producer Jeff Tremaine a video cassette of one of his stunts, Steve-O found himself starring alongside Johnny Knoxville in the 2000 to 2001 MTV reality series Jackass. The show would only air for 3 short seasons, but went on to spawn a series of films, starting with the original Jackass, the movie. Off a tiny budget of $5 million, the movie would top the box office at its opening weekend, eventually grossing around $80 million worldwide. 3 more installments would follow, the last one being 2022's Jackass Forever. All movies were major box office hits. Let's have a quick look at Steve-O from that original Jackass picture.
Yeah, there you go. Go, keep going, Steve-O. Oh, shit.
Though he had become very wealthy and famous, not much had changed in terms of Steve-O's drug abuse and working hours. Things had actually gotten worse for one simple reason. Now that he had money, he could afford all the cocaine he wanted. Fueled by cocaine and working without sleep for days on end, he would then crash for up to 2 days in a row. By the time the crew of the original Jackass movie got together to film the sequel in 2006, Tremaine and Steve-O agreed that he would abstain from cocaine for the duration of filming. It was a promise that he would keep. He ended up staying a full year off cocaine before relapsing and picking up right where he had left off. Around this time, and before Jackass 2 was even released, his addiction to nitrous oxide, or laughing gas as it's more widely known, got really out of control. This stuff is legally sold, widely available, and has very powerful and short-lasting effects. Steve-O would go on to order cases of 600 whippets and inhale one of them after the other. He got so fast at changing the whippets and chaining them together that it got to the point where he, quote, wasn't even breathing air. In the midst of his most severe addictive spiral, he described showing up at the premiere of the Jackass sequel feeling as if he were attending his own funeral. Amongst other fears, he was anxious that the Jackass franchise had reached its peak and it would all be downhill from there. After Jackass 2, as a way to stay in the spotlight, he tried to launch an unsuccessful rap career. This brought him in touch with the subculture that would only exacerbate his drinking and drug problems. He started to lose touch with his friends and family, often isolating himself in his home. Eventually, his drug abuse messed up so much that he started to chat with voices in his head and could hear his own thoughts out loud. And guys, you don't need to be a psychiatrist to see that these are extremely serious symptoms. And Steve-O was perilously close to an irreversibly bad ending. Looking back, he describes his state at the time as, quote, possessed by demons and very close to death. We're not going to show any of this footage, but it is freely available online. So if you feel like you can stomach it, go ahead and check it out. But be warned, some of it is very distressing. Now, following multiple arrests and public breakdowns, at one stage Steve-O started sending suicidal emails to his friends and family. In March of 2008, Johnny Knoxville, Jeff Tremaine, and 6 other colleagues came to his home, picked him up, and took him in by force for a psychiatric evaluation. An initially planned 72 hours at the psychiatric department turned into 2 weeks. This was soon followed by a 30-day stay in a treatment center and 2 months at a sober living facility. But even though he managed to stay away from alcohol and drugs throughout all of this time, his motivation for wanting to change was a bit flawed. In interviews, he has talked about how he wanted to become a poster child for sobriety and an inspiration for other people. He also couldn't put the camera down and continued filming himself doing all sorts of silly things. After 3 months of sobriety, he felt depressed, worthless, and unsure about wanting to live. He voluntarily checked himself into another institution for several weeks. By that point, he was ready to come around to one big insight. He had to do this for himself and himself alone. Not for his friends, nor his family, his colleagues, society, none of it. Only for himself. He set the camera aside and became focused on his recovery, exceeding all expectations of those around him. In those early days, he was also aided in his recovery by a good old friend, the skateboard. Without alcohol, without drugs, just like when he was a child. He picked up the skateboard with a newfound enthusiasm. For the first time in years, he was having fun on his skateboard. Here's what he had to say in 2009, a few months into his sobriety.
It was the guys I filmed Jackass with that actually staged my intervention. So they've been there, you know, in the good times and the bad. And anybody that's not supportive of me staying sober obviously has to go.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's not really a lot of people that don't want me to stay sober. I mean, I was a nightmare. Like, I was a
Especially
nightmare.
in this town, there's so many people that will leech onto the celebrity just so they can kind of...
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, like, you know, when you go through what I've been through, you find out who your friends are. And I got some good friends, man. I'm really grateful.
Looking back at his drinking, Steve-O is now grateful for the opportunity that it gave him to overcome adversity and become a better person. At 48 years of age, Steve-O could not possibly be a more changed man. Clean for 14 years, he meditates 40 minutes a day and is happily engaged to be married. He also runs a thriving business with a YouTube channel, a podcast, and 2 very successful books. From a young age, Mike Tyson was destined for boxing greatness. After being spotted by a local boxing coach in his native Brooklyn, he was soon being coached by a legendary trainer, Cusa D'Amato. Tyson would make his professional debut in March of 1985 at just 18 years of age, winning by first-round knockout. After racking up an astonishing 27 wins over the next 20 months, he would go on to face Trevor Burnick for the World Championship. With his second round knockout of Berbick,
Tyson would become the youngest heavyweight champion ever, and he was only 20 years of age. Over the next 4 years, the young Tyson would go on to terrorize boxing's heavyweight division, amassing a perfect 37-0 record. Most of these wins would come through brutal knockouts. The entire world watched, mesmerized at Tyson's never-before speed, power and defensive skills. All this made him a seemingly unstoppable force. But in February of 1990, in what became one of the biggest upsets in sporting history, Tyson would lose his belt to 30-year-old Buster Douglas. At the time, Tyson was a 42-1 favorite. The following year, before he could reclaim his title, Tyson was arrested for raping an 18-year-old girl he had invited to his hotel room. Tyson has always denied the accusation, saying the sex was consensual. Sentenced to 6 years in prison, he would only serve 3, before being released in 1995. Though he managed to briefly recapture the heavyweight title once again the following year, he was never the same fighter. After suffering several losses over the next few years, he finally retired in 2005. Now, despite having one of the most celebrated boxing careers of all time, as well as earning many hundreds of millions of dollars, Tyson has often described his life as a complete failure. Born in Brooklyn, his father left the family when the young Mike was only a few months old. His mother struggled to raise him and his 2 siblings, and he was forced to routinely witness violent incidents between his mother and the various men that she brought to the house. Living on the rough streets of New York, Tyson had to learn to fight, and before long he got into trouble with the law. By his account, by the time he was just 11 years of age, he had been arrested 38 times, mostly for pickpocketing and burglaries. His mother sadly died when he was 16, only 2 years before his professional debut. To this day, one of his big regrets is that his mother never saw him happy or proud of him. All she knew of him was a kid who was always in trouble. Drugs and alcohol have been an almost permanent fixture of Mike Tyson's life. He was given alcohol even as his child, and he first tried cocaine when he was just 11. He continued abusing alcohol and cocaine throughout his heyday as the heavyweight champion of the world in the mid and late 1980s, and then all the way to his 2005 retirement. Sometimes, like in his 2000 fight against Lou Savarese, Tyson would consume cocaine right before stepping into the ring. Now, astonishingly, that didn't prevent him from winning that fight only 38 seconds into the first round. To pass all the drug tests before and after his fights, Tyson would use what he calls his whizzer, a prosthetic penis with somebody else's urine. On occasion, the urine was of his own baby. In his 2000 fight with Andrew Galota, he didn't have time to use the whizzer, leading to a positive drug test. Even though he had easily won his fight in the ring, his victory was overturned to a no contest. In 2006, he was arrested on suspicion of a DUI and felony drug possession of cocaine. Fueled by his drug and alcohol addiction, Tyson would go on spending tremendous amounts of money. Earning as much as $60 million a fight, Tyson managed to blow it all on things like a massive entourage, a fleet of cars, jewelry, and even a pet zoo. On one occasion, after crashing one of his Bentleys, he actually told the cops that arrived on the scene just to keep it. Now, he filed for bankruptcy in 2003 after having squandered a fortune of around $400 million. Many details of Tyson's drug and alcohol addiction were publicly available over the years, and Tyson himself was generally straightforward about it. For a few years after he retired from boxing, Tyson seemed to have beat his addiction. But in a shocking 2013 press conference, Tyson announced to the stunned reporters that he had relapsed again.
I'm on the verge of dying because I'm a vicious alcoholic. I've been, God, this is some interesting stuff. I haven't took drugs in 6 days. And for me, that's a miracle. I've been lying to everybody else and think I was sober, but I'm not. This is my 6th day. I'm never going to use again.
Tyson would then elaborate on this in an interview with NBC's Matt Laurer.
I haven't drank for 4.5 years, and I took a drink, and I started being. I just started chugging them. Wing, 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 wing.
After 4.5 years of sobriety, what was it that got you to take that drink?
I don't know, too much stuff coming at me. I'm doing my auto documentary. Everything just started creeping up on me, hitting me, boom. I started going to my old neighborhood, and I started dealing with old wounds that opened up, and it was just overwhelming.
What you said at the press conference, you said you'd been lying to everyone about being sober, that you were on the verge of dying because you're a vicious alcoholic.
Yeah.
Did you mean those words? You say people blew it out of proportion. But talk to me about that choice of words.
Those are the words I use because sometimes I don't want to live when I'm in that state. It's just really difficult to discuss. I don't know. I'm not experienced enough in my recovery to really pinpoint it.
I went back and I read some interviews you've done over the years. And you know what I found, Mike? I found references on your part to suicide dating all the way back to the late 1980s. This is something that's come up from time to time in your life. How much do you think about it?
Not that much. It's just sometimes if I get drunk, I'm just not the same guy. So I just need to see my friends and see my sponsors and talk to them.
And so it's something you've struggled with your whole life?
My whole entire life, yeah.
The turning point for Mike came in 2019. That year, he decided enough was enough. In another interview, he had the following to say.
You're kind of a different dude compared to what you are now.
What was that back then? Tell me about this shit.
You just, maybe you weren't comfortable with it. You let the other guy do like all the talking. And you were just kind of like there for the ride?
That must have been my cocaine days and stuff.
Maybe.
Yeah,
some would say the good days.
I don't know. I won't say that. But those are the days that I was probably zoned out.
Yeah, you were kind of zoned out. And then when they told me you were going to do the hot box, I'm like, oh, well, we'll see how that goes. And then it's freaking taken off, man.
That's because I stopped doing cocaine and drinking and everything. No, I'm serious, man.
Yeah, really?
Everything changed, yeah.
Really? Changed your life?
My whole life.
At the same time that he was kicking alcohol and cocaine, Tyson was making a dramatic fitness comeback. After not having trained for nearly 15 years, he went back to the gym, got in shape, and returned for an exhibition fight against another boxing legend, Roy Jones Jr. Though Tyson has kicked alcohol and cocaine, Tyson has not given up cannabis. In fact, shortly after cannabis became legal in California in 2016, Tyson entered the cannabis business. His company sells a variety of marijuana products and sales are booming, earning him over $600,000 a month. Recently, Tyson's company launched a new brand of cannabis-infused edibles called Mike Bites. I had no idea about this before researching this video, but they're shaped as ears, which is a reference to one of the most infamous moments in Tyson's career, when he bit off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear in 1996. In a recent interview, Tyson opened up about how he got into the cannabis business. He also credited cannabis for helping him find peace.
What made you want to get into this space commercially?
Well, listen, Megan, I was talking to a friend. I was in Thailand. We were shooting a movie, and he was discussing doing cannabis as an enterprise. And I didn't believe. I didn't want to go for it. It became real.
What has it done for you? Obviously, you've gone through a lot of fights, a lot of pain, physical and otherwise.
Absolutely. It's put me in a frame of mind where I could be at peace with myself, my family, my dear friends. I don't have to have outbursts that I took when I did opiates. And it keeps me healthy. I have to test all the products, and all the products are very resounding in effect, yeah.
Now, Tyson currently lives with his third wife. After a casual on and off relationship, the two became serious when Lakia gave birth to his daughter Milan in 2008. The couple married in 2009 in what Tyson has described as a, quote, truly life-saving experience. They have 2 children together, while Mike has 5 more from other relationships. The majority of us probably first saw Tom Hardy in Christopher Nolan's 2010 Inception alongside Leonardo DiCaprio and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Now, fans of war movies might have seen him all the way back in 2001's Black Hawk Down. This was his big screen debut. Over the years, he's appeared in countless movies and series. Some of his most memorable roles include 2008's Bronson, where he had to put on 40 pounds of muscle. There was also 2011's Warrior, where he played a cage fighter. This was another role for which he had to undergo exhausting training. He's also appeared in Mad Max Road Fury, Dark Knight Rises, and many more movies. He's basically played just about any role imaginable in all different genres. His net worth is estimated at around $45 million. He has 3 children, 2 from his second wife, actress Charlotte Riley, and another from a woman that he's dated in between his 2 marriages. So, Hardy was born in 1977 in London to middle-class artist parents, and he got his first taste of drugs at only 11 years old. Ironically, this was after a policeman visited his school to warn students about the dangers of sniffing glue. Sounds awesome, the young Thomas thought. Where do I get some? Now, only 2 years later, he had gone from sniffing glue to hallucinogens. And that's also when he tasted his first beer. He described the experience as calming and left him wanting more. Now, he was in constant trouble in his teenage years, experiencing many run-ins with the police, and some of these resulted in juvenile jail. At 16, he was expelled from his boarding school for theft. By that age, he was already heavily abusing alcohol and cocaine. The following year, he got arrested for car theft and possession of a gun. The fact that he was carrying a gun when he stole the car meant that he could potentially be facing up to 14 years in prison. He describes the 6 weeks that he waited for the Crown Prosecution's service to come back to the case as the scariest time of his life, unable to sleep knowing that his life was hanging on the balance. Now, fortunately for us, he walked away scot-free on a technicality. Turns out the other boy in the car with him was the son of a diplomat. This complicated things for the prosecution, who eventually dropped the case. In his late teens and early 20s, he dabbled in modelling, which he once described as quite soul-destroying. Now, at the suggestion of an acquaintance, he decided to join drama school, which his parents picked up the tab for. All this time, his drinking and drug abuse continued. He describes how he tried to rationalise his addiction as artistic in nature, but deep down, he understood that it was destroying him. In a 2017 interview, he was quoted as saying, "If I had 4 pints of lager and half a bottle of vodka, I could turn the room into an absolute fucking nightmare in about 3 minutes. I could destroy everything in my life that I have worked so hard for." In another famous quote, he said that he would sell his mother for crack if he could. Aside from alcohol and cocaine, he tried just about every illicit substance that there was. Now, things came to a head in 2003. After a wild night of partying, he woke up in a crowded street in Soho. He was lying in a puddle of his own blood and vomit. That morning, the doctor that treated him laid it out in black and white for him. "I was told very clearly, you go down that road, Tom, you will not come back. That's it. All you need to know." And that message stayed with me clearly for the rest of my days. He went to rehab that same year and successfully completed a 28-day program. He was 25 years old at the time, and he has not had a drink since. He says having his son Lewis definitely played a part in him coming clean. Now, the public didn't really know about Hardy's addiction battles until around 2006. With 3 years of sobriety under his belt, he began to open up about his troubles in the past. Now, the UK government was not very happy with these revelations though, and they banned Hardy from speaking to school children. Hardy would discuss his alcohol and drug abuse on several interviews over the following years. Now, addiction researchers call this polysubstance abuse, and it's actually the norm rather than the exception with heavy drinkers. For example, a 2001 study with alcoholics seeking treatment in New York found that 2/3 reported recent drug use, mostly cocaine, crack, heroin, and cannabis. The heavier the drinker, the more severe drug abuse that they tended to report. Now, Hardy has been aided in his recovery by a healthy lifestyle with significant sporting activity. On screen, he's undergone various incredible body transformations for various roles. But even when he's not preparing for a film, he works out regularly at the gym and also practices martial arts. Today, Hardy volunteers as an ambassador for the charity Prince's Trust. He is very grateful for getting a second chance in life, and this is his way of making sure that other young people also get that second chance. His latest film, Venom 2, was in the top 10 grossing movies of 2021, and we wish him all the best. James Allen Hetfield was born in Downey, California in 1963. His father was a truck driver and his mother a singer. His parents divorced when he was 13 and his father left without saying goodbye. And sadly, his mother died of cancer shortly after. The young James then moved in with his older half-brother. From an early age, James showed an inclination for music. He started learning the piano when he was 9. This was soon followed by drums and finally guitar. As a teenager, he played for a few bands. Now, in October of 1981, James answered a Musicians Wanted newspaper ad from drummer Lars Ulrich. Ulrich would later describe James as one of the shyest people that he had met, barely able to even say hello. The duo initially teamed up with guitarist Dave Mustaine of Megadeth fame. Mustaine was soon fired on account of his erratic character and drug abuse problems and replaced by Kirk Hammett. The lineup was completed by legendary Cliff Burton at the bass. The band would release their first album, Kill 'Em All, in 1983. Their next 3 albums would become increasingly more successful commercially and come to dominate the heavy metal scene. The world had simply never heard anything as heavy, raw and at the same time melodic. Metallica had broken the mold and single-handedly redefined heavy metal. And let me know in the comment section your favourite Metallica song. However, it would be their 1991 Black Album that would break all records and propel them to international superstardom. The album would go on to become one of the top 25 best-selling albums of all time in the US and top the charts in numerous countries around the world. Since then, Metallica have recorded several more albums and have gone on to sell 125 million records worldwide. Along the way, they've collected more awards and nominations than we could even list here. Now, as you can imagine, all this success has made Hetfield a very, very wealthy man, with an estimated net worth of $300 million. Now, what about James's addiction? Well, there's a kind of drugs and alcohol stereotype with rock bands, and Metallica were no exception. In a 2003 interview, guitarist Kirk Hammett recounted his first impressions of the band. Quote, "When I first met these guys, they were drinking vodka like it was water. I would start drinking about 12 in the afternoon. We would arrive at the club and go straight to the bar and see how much booze we could consume for free, and by the time we went out on stage, we were almost always sourced." Addiction would be one of the recurring themes in the band's music, most notably in Master of Puppets, one of their most famous songs. While other members of the band took illicit drugs like cocaine, Hetfield struggled with alcohol.
Alcohol was, ever since my mother died, that became more of a part of me. Alcohol at age 16. It became, it starts off as the cliche, hey, I feel more alive, I feel looser, I feel more comfortable, I can talk to women, I can, get on stage and all of this. It was kind of the fog. I was already in somewhat of a fog, and that helped it be more fun. And then the typical story of starting to need it. And then it became just like this maintenance. And it was a constant fog, and a lot of things I can't remember. Blackout drinking was not good. Getting in fights, all kinds of, a trail of destruction, the cliche of that. But then it certainly got more and more evident that it was changing me. I was bringing some of the road life home. And now I had a family and children, and it certainly wasn't a good combination.
Now, in July of 2001, the band's official website announced that Hetfield had checked himself into rehab to, quote, undergo treatment for alcoholism and other addictions. The move forced the band to indefinitely postpone their scheduled tour and pause the recording of their new album. For a while, their very existence seemed uncertain. Now, while in rehab, Hetfield was forced to deal with two of the biggest tragedies in his life. These were the premature passing away of his mother when he was only a teenager, as well as the death of Metallica bassist Cliff Burton in 1986. Burton had sadly died when the band's touring bus skidded on the street and rolled over. He was crushed in front of the rest of the band's eyes. In a 2016 interview, Hetfield had this to say, "We drank a lot. And then when Cliff passed, it was doubled, took twice as much to stuff it down. And I never ever really grieved. We just went back out, started touring again, and that was supposedly the remedy to shake it off and to get back on the horse, all the cliches. But when I was in rehab in 2001, they said, you gotta hang out a couple more weeks because of the grieving. There's your mum and Cliff. The two people that you have never been able to grieve around. You gotta do some work on it." So that's exactly what they did. Now, Hetfield's stint at rehab and subsequent recovery would take longer than expected. He finally returned to Metallica 9 months later, in April of 2002, at which point the band resumed recording right away. To ease his transition back into work, Hetfield initially had a strict 4-hour-a-day schedule from noon till 4 p.m. Now, Hetfield would go on to enjoy almost 2 decades of sobriety. During this time, he was very open about his past addiction struggles and talked about them on camera on a number of occasions.
And, the drink, the chick, the whatever was always a quick fix.
Do you miss it?
Well, if I want to miss it, if I feed the dog that says, "This was so great, remember this?" Or if I feed the dog that says, "Dude, look how great your life is right now. Look at the crap that you used to be in." you know, it depends on how you look at it. And I know I could go back and fuck things up pretty quick.
In September of 2019, however, Metallica fans were in for a shock. The band officially announced that Hetfield had relapsed and all upcoming tours were cancelled. Few details of this rehab stint emerged, but a few months later, in January of 2020, Hetfield made his first public appearance at an automotive museum in Los Angeles. Fans on Twitter were quick to point out how much better the star looked compared to his pre-rehab photos, noticeably lighter and with a much healthier complexion. Hetfield has now returned to Metallica and resumed touring full-time. By all accounts, he remains sober. In his personal life, James is happily married to Francesca Hetfield, whom he met in 1993. The couple married 4 years later and have 3 children together. James credits Francesca with being a very positive influence in his life, helping him resolve his anger issues as well as supporting him through the addiction struggles. They spend most of their time in their mansion in Colorado, which has an estimated market value of just under $30 million. Aside from music, his big passion in life is cars, and he is the proud owner of a large collection of vintage automobiles.
Born in California in 1975, Barrymore was marked for the silver screen already as a young child. Her parents were both actors, and her grandfather, John Barrymore, was a famous actor in the 1920s and 30s. Drew would get her first acting experiences only a few months after being born, appearing in commercials and other small roles. At the tender age of 7, she would land the acting role that would define her future career. That was the year she successfully auditioned for a role in the sci-fi blockbuster E.T., the Extraterrestrial. The film tells the story of an extraterrestrial accidentally stranded on Earth during a secret mission. Elliot, a young schoolboy, soon finds and befriends E.T., eventually helping him return home. The film would go on to win 4 Academy Awards, spend a record-breaking 16 weeks at the top of the box office, and eventually become the highest-grossing production of all time. Overnight, Barrymore was propelled to superstardom, becoming a recognizable face all across the world. Though she would soon run into a rough patch that threatened to end her career entirely, which we'll come to shortly, she would eventually go on to star in a number of other blockbuster hits. These included, among many others, The Wedding Singer, Charlie's Angels, and He's Just Not That Into You. Her net worth today is estimated at around a whopping $125 million. From what we just said, you might have gotten the impression that it's been all roses for Barrymore, and while money or fame were never in short order for her, she has had her fair share of struggles, and most of these were well publicised. Her father was an alcoholic and drug addict, leaving her mother no choice but to divorce him and raise Drew on her own. She was only a few months old at the time. As a child, this was something that was very hard for Drew to swallow, leading her to resent her mother. But there was more to it than that. Her mother never quite succeeded as an actress, and by all accounts, she was determined that her daughter not meet the same fate. After E.T., she started taking the young Drew to nightclubs and other adult establishments to socialize with celebrities. Before long, the young Drew was introduced to alcohol at just 8 years of age. Cigarettes followed a short time later before giving way to cannabis and eventually cocaine. Her drinking soon got so out of control that she became addicted to alcohol. She had her first stint at rehab when she was only 12. Around this time, she also attempted to kill herself with a knife. Now, by the age of 13, things had gotten so out of control that her mother committed her to a psychiatric ward. She would spend a year and a half there, and this was no joke. This was a hardcore psychiatric facility where not behaving could leave you in isolation or put in restraints. To this day, Barrymore jokes about how other stars spending 30 days in a luxury rehab is, well, a walk in a park compared to what she went through. While harsh, in other interviews, the star has described the experience in a positive light. Quote, "It was like serious recruitment training and boot camp, and it was a horrible and dark and very long-lived year and a half, but I needed it. I needed that whole insane discipline." While at the facility, the medical staff realized that part of the problem was actually down to her mother. At their recommendation, she went to court to seek her emancipation. And emancipation is basically a legal process where the courts decide that a minor can be set free from the supervision of their parents. The minor is then able to live and function as an adult, entering into contracts and making all their own decisions without their parents' involvement. To qualify for emancipation, the minor must meet certain criteria, chief of which is economic self-sufficiency. The court granted her the emancipation, meaning that she was legally entitled to live completely on her own. Looking back on the entire situation today, Barrymore sums it up as her mother creating a monster and then not knowing what to do with it, and emancipation was the chance for her to wipe the slate clean. By that point, however, her acting career was in tatters. Having not landed a major role for years and with a heavily tarnished reputation, the young Barrymore felt like her acting days were over. For a while, she ended up working as a waitress in a cafe, a job which she admits that she absolutely was terrible at. Eventually, she was able to find work in Hollywood again. First in some minor films before eventually landing roles in box office hits like 2000's Charlie's Angels. Barrymore would go on drinking for decades. Her drinking was never at a level where things got visibly out of control, at least not to her millions of fans around the world. There were no public breakdowns, problems with law enforcement, or things of this kind. But at the end of the day, it wasn't good. According to Cameron Diaz, Barrymore's longtime friend and co-star on the set of Charlie's Angels, things started to deteriorate after the breakdown of her third marriage. After her marriage fell apart, Barrymore once again turned heavily to booze. This reportedly caused her longtime therapist to terminate her as a client and led to the loss of some friends. As Barrymore would later describe, the divorce left her with the bitter aftertaste of death. Quote, "There was no scandal, nothing went wrong, which is cleaner but makes it harder and more confusing, but there isn't the thing to point to. We tried so hard to make it work. A friend said to me, divorce is the death of a dream. That's exactly what it feels like. Something so final you can't get it back." In 2021, Barrymore made an announcement that put a big smile on her fans and followers worldwide. In an interview on CBS's This Morning show, the star revealed that she hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in 2.5 years. Let's have a look.
I have not had a drink of alcohol in 2.5 years. And it was something that I realized just did not serve me in my life. When you are stuck in a pattern, or if you are going through things and you not only admit them out loud, but you force yourself to say, I'm willing to make big changes. I think we all think we're very weak when we don't make those changes. That inner dialogue proves to us, you're not capable of change. You are weak, you're staying stuck. And when you break that cycle, the empowerment that comes out of it that says, I'm not weak, I'm actually strong, I've proven to myself that I am capable of change, and I believe people are capable of big changes.
After keeping quiet about things for so long, Barrymore nowadays has no problems opening up about her past alcohol problems. Looking back, she describes her drinking days as, well, the only way I think one can rationally describe alcohol addiction, a prison. It's awesome that she's so candid about her past and putting her story out there for the benefit of others who might struggle.
Zachary David Alexander Efron was born in 1987 in California. Growing up in a comfortable, middle-class suburb, he showed a penchant for singing and acting from a young age. After graduating from high school in 2006, he appeared on various TV shows, including the very famous ER. The turning point in his career came in 2006 when he starred in Disney's highly successful High School Musical. This was soon followed up by the two sequels, High School Musical Parts 2 and 3. From that point on, his career kept getting bigger and bigger, and today he is one of the most recognizable faces of Hollywood. Over the years, Efron has starred in such Hollywood hits as 2012's The Lucky One, 2017's Baywatch, as well as The Greatest Showman, which also came out that same year. As of 2022, his net worth is estimated at around $25 million. So, like many other celebrities that we've covered on this channel, Efron's rise to stardom has not been without difficulties, especially in the early part of his career. He admits to dealing with a tremendous degree of insecurity. He has publicly stated that at one point in his life, he would Google his name every single morning to find out what the world was saying about him. At the same time, the star was suffering with bouts of anxiety and insomnia. Reportedly, he would stay awake for days at a time or party all night and fall asleep late in the afternoon. These struggles with anxiety and insomnia were exacerbated by the star's ever-growing dependence on alcohol and illicit drugs, notably cocaine and ecstasy. Now, it's not clear exactly when Efron first developed these addictions. Certainly for a few years leading up to 2011, he was able to manage his drinking and drug abuse, so it didn't interfere with his career. But between 2011 and 2013, things reportedly got really out of hand. In a 2014 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Efron opened up about his addiction. I was drinking a lot, way too much. You're in your 20s, single, going through life in Hollywood, everything is thrown at you. In another interview, he had this to say: "It was just so quick, it was shocking. The challenging part was never the work, that was never it. It was sort of the in-between work, the social aspects outside of it. Everywhere you go, There are people watching and it can be confusing, and pretty soon you need a social lubricant. It got to the point where I was caring less about the work and waiting more for the weekend, where I couldn't wait to go out and let loose and have fun. Though he was struggling, Efron was careful to not let his troubles become public knowledge. He tried to avoid embarrassing scenes and often drank or take drugs in private. On one occasion though, things did get out of hand, and Efron made the headlines for getting in a fight with a homeless man. Reportedly, he was driving with a friend when they ran out of gas in a rundown part of town. A homeless man knocked on their window, and before long the two got into a fist fight. The police did get involved, but no charges were pressed on either side, and it is not clear if the star was intoxicated at the time. By 2013, things had gotten so bad that Efron knew he had to do something. He entered rehab in March of 2013, where he spent several weeks. As soon as he got out of rehab, the star went back to work, acting with Seth Rogen on the comedy Neighbours. The movie would go on to become a massive hit at the box office. Now, shooting started in April of that year, and it soon became evident that Efron's stint at rehab had not been successful. According to TMZ, Efron would no-show for a number of days, and it was common knowledge among the movie production team that he was back to taking cocaine. After shooting had wrapped up, Efron went back into rehab. This time, Efron came out a changed man and actually began attending regular AA meetings to aid his recovery. We know that he had his last drink ever in June of 2013, because 6 months later, in December of that year, he was spotted at a Los Angeles Lakers game wearing a 6-month sobriety chip around his neck, and he's been clean ever since. So, to aid in his recovery, Efron follows a training program that involves lifting weights, bodyweight exercises, and a clean diet. Especially for his role in Baywatch, the star had to get in the best shape of his life. Aside from training and healthy eating, the star is reported to practice transcendental meditation. The goal is to, quote, "never again want to take anything from the outside in to feel comfortable in my present skin," and that takes a lot of work. It's just meditation and stopping and slowing down your brain. So how has the drinking changed his life? Well, his career keeps progressing. In 2020, Netflix launched the documentary series Down to Earth with Zac Efron. The documentary series follows the star as he travels around various countries. His goal is to find secrets to healthy living and sustainable development. His upcoming movie, 3 Men and a Baby, marks the star's return to Disney. A remake of the 1980s comedy, the film tells the story of 3 bachelors who suddenly find themselves forced to take care of a baby. Stephen Edwin King was born in Portland, Maine in 1947. Now, when he was only 2 years old, his father one day told his mother that he was going to the store for a pack of cigarettes, and sadly he never came back. His mother was then left alone to raise the young Stephen and his brother David. King describes his childhood as one of being perpetually broke, hardly ever seeing any money. He started writing stories when he was only 6 or 7. Around that time, he also found a box of horror and fantasy books that his father had left behind, an event that set the tone for the kind of fiction that he would then go on to write. King studied English at the University of Maine and graduated in 1970. It was here as an undergrad that he met his future wife, Tabitha Spruce. King had several odd jobs during his studies, including janitor and working at a gas station. Following his graduation, he sold short stories to men's magazines, but struggled to get any of his major novels published. All this time, his wife was working at Dunkin' Donuts, and the couple was living a very basic life, not even able to afford a telephone. Now, it was his 4th novel, Carrie, that was finally accepted for publication by a small publishing house. This was a novel that he wrote on his wife's typewriter, as he still couldn't afford to buy his own. Now, Carrie tells the story of a troubled high school student who goes on to develop telekinetic powers and exact revenge from her abusive classmates. After writing the first 3 pages, King threw them into the garbage. His wife pulled the pages from the garbage and convinced him to finish the book, saying that she saw something special in it, and finish it he did. After getting rejected by multiple publishers, the manuscript was finally picked up by a small publishing house. The book became an instant success, selling over 1 million copies in its first year and catapulting King into international recognition. In 1976, it was also turned into a movie, the first of many Stephen King novels to earn this distinction. Carrie would be followed up by 2 more highly successful books, Salem's Lot and The Shining. The latter was also turned into a critically acclaimed movie with Jack Nicholson. The rest, as they say, was history. King would go on to publish around 80 books in total and become one of the best-selling authors of all time. Altogether, he has sold an estimated 350 million copies, while also racking up more awards and nominations than we could possibly list in today's video. So, when it comes to Stephen King's story of addiction and recovery, we are very lucky that he wrote it in his own memoirs, aptly called On Writing. So we do have it straight from the horse's mouth. In the memoirs, he describes the whole story, from the first steps to addiction until his long and painful recovery. He first got drunk in 1966, still a high school senior. He continued to drink moderately throughout the years until his mother's death from uterine cancer in 1974. Her passing took a heavy toll on him, and his drinking got progressively worse. Looking back now, he identifies 1975 as the year he became a quote alcoholic. But at the time, he did not think he had a problem. Then, some point in the early 1980s, it finally hit him. King was still living in Maine at the time, and the state had just started a program of recycling cans. One day, he went into the garage to throw away another can and saw it was already full, having been emptied only 3 days ago. It was at that moment that he realized that he had a serious problem. But for years, he was caught between the realization that he had a problem and his inability to stop. In his memoirs, he describes how every night before going to bed, he would pour any beers left in the fridge down the sink, only to buy more beer the following day. I mean, I've been there and done that as well. By the mid-1980s, he had added hard drugs and prescription pills to his alcohol addiction. The most serious of his other addictions was cocaine, but it had gotten so bad that he was basically abusing anything that he could get his hands on. Guys, believe it or not, it even got to a point where he was drinking mouthwash, which has an alcohol content of around 25%. He doesn't explain why, but in all likelihood, it was simply trying to hide the extent of drinking from his family. Now, for years, King justified his drinking as part of being a writer, something like a creative license, if you will. However, desperate for help, but unable to bring himself to ask for it, he started communicating his plight to the world through his fiction. Works that came out in 1985 to 86, like Misery and The Tommyknockers, were actually metaphors for drug abuse and desperation. Quote, Tommyknockers is a 40s-style fiction tale in which the writer-heroine discovers an alien spacecraft buried in the ground. The crew is still on board, not dead, but only hibernating. These alien creatures got into your head and just started, well, Tommyknocking around in there. What you got was energy and a kind of superficial intelligence. What you gave up, in exchange, was your soul. It was the best metaphor for drugs and alcohol my tired, overstressed mind could come up with. He describes writing these books late into midnight with a pulse of 130 beats per minute and cotton swabs lodged inside of his nose to prevent the cocaine-induced bleeding. Now, most of the recovery stories that we cover on this channel start with an aha moment. An instant when you realize that you can't go on living this way anymore, and you either need to stop on your own, or if that's not possible, ask for help. But this was not the case with King. Though he had long realized that he was addicted, he did not ultimately come to the decision to stop on his own. He actually never reached out or asked for help. Rather, it was his wife Tabitha who had had enough. She forced things on him by raising the stakes so high that she basically left him with no choice. So here's what Tabitha did. She arranged for a group of friends and relatives to come around to the house, presumably without telling King. And then she literally dumped his office trashing in front of everyone. What came out of that trash can was both shocking and disgusting at the same time. Beer cans, cigarette butts, cocaine spoons mixed with blood and snot, prescriptions, pills, cough syrup, empty bottles of mouthwash. Presented with all of this evidence and in front of everybody, Tabby gave him an ultimatum. Clean up his act or leave the house. After some bargaining and manipulation tactics, Tabby agreed to give King 2 weeks to think things over. Now, as I mentioned, one of his major concerns was that he simply wouldn't be able to write if he wasn't drunk or high. After 2 weeks of thinking, however, he reconciled himself with the worst possible outcome, that he wouldn't be able to write anymore if he was sober. He decided that his wife and kids were more important to him than writing. He entered rehab and never had another drink in his life. And, as it turned out, of course, he never stopped writing. Quote, the idea that creative endeavor and mind-altering substances are intertwined is one of the great pop intellectual myths of our time. Substance-abusing writers are just substance abusers. Common garden variety drunks and druggies, in other words. Any claims that the drugs and alcohol are necessary to dull a finer sensibility are the usual self-serving BS. I've heard alcohol snowplow drivers make the same claim, that they drink to still the demons. He goes on, creative people probably do run a greater risk of alcoholism and addiction than those in some other jobs, but so what? We all look pretty much the same when we're puking in the gutter. Now, as we all know, giving up alcohol and drugs in 1986 did not in the least impact his writing career. He would go on to write dozens of books after this, some of which would become among his most successful works. But it was not easy at first. Quote, at the worst of it, I no longer wanted to drink and no longer wanted to be sober either. I felt evicted from life. His writing was flat at the beginning, but this was not down to any missing creative boost that he was no longer getting from alcohol. His brain simply needed time to rewire after all of the years of abuse. Little by little, he regained his stride, and then the joy of writing also came back. He describes coming back to his wife and family in the same way that somebody returns to their summer cottage after a long winter, checking to make sure, nothing was broken or stolen, and that everything was still there, and of course, it still was. Today, Stephen King splits his time between his residences in Maine and Florida. After more than 5 decades, he is still happily married to Tabby, and the couple have 3 children. Though he's probably accomplished more than any writer could possibly hope for and amassed a fortune of close to $500 million, King shows absolutely no sign of slowing down. His latest book, Gwendy's Final Task, was released last February. What a great story. Have a great day.